Have you ever wondered what lurks in the shadows of the Emerald City when the coffee shops close and the rain starts to fall? Living in Seattle means experiencing things tourists never see. The forgotten underground tunnels, the fog-covered bridges at 3 a.m., the old buildings where something dark happened decades ago, but nobody talks about it anymore. Today's stories come from real Seattle residents. Names and details have been altered for their privacy, but what they experienced in this city is terrifyingly real. I promise you, these encounters will make you see Seattle streets differently after dark. Drop your location and what time you're watching in the comments below. And if you want more real horror stories that will haunt your nightmares, subscribe to Bleak Fears. Because the Pacific Northwest holds secrets darker than its endless rainy nights. Now, let's uncover these disturbing true stories from Seattle. My name is Sybil, and I'm a graphic designer in my late 20s. I moved to Seattle about 8 months ago for a fresh start after a bad breakup back in Portland. The job market was better here. The city had that creative energy I was looking for, and honestly, I just needed to be somewhere new. I found this beautiful vintage apartment on Capitol Hill, right on 15th Ave East. The building was from the 1920s. All original hardwood floors, high ceilings with ornate molding, and these huge windows that let in so much natural light. It was perfect, or at least that's what I thought when I signed the lease. The rent was surprisingly affordable for the area, which should have been my first red flag. But I was so excited about the exposed brick wall in the living room and the clawfoot tub in the bathroom that I didn't think twice about it. The landlord, an older woman who lived in Bellevue, seemed pleasant enough during the walkthrough. She mentioned the building had a lot of history and character, which I took as a positive thing. I moved in on a rainy Saturday in March, which feels like every day in Seattle, and spent the weekend unpacking and arranging my furniture. I adopted a cat shortly after moving in, a gray tabby I named Walter. I figured having a pet would make the new place feel more like home, and Walter was perfect company while I worked from my home office. He was playful and affectionate, always curling up on my lap while I worked on design projects for clients. Everything felt like it was falling into place. I had a great apartment, a sweet cat, and my freelance work was picking up. For the first month, life in Seattle was exactly what I had hoped it would be. The first Polaroid appeared on a Tuesday morning in early April. I woke up, made my coffee, and opened my apartment door to grab a package I was expecting from Amazon. That's when I saw it, a small Polaroid photograph lying face down on the doormat. I picked it up, turned it over, and felt my stomach drop. It was a photo of me, asleep in my bed, taken from the foot of the bed looking toward the headboard. I was on my side, facing away from the camera, my hair spread across the pillow. Walter was curled up near my feet. The photo was slightly grainy, the way Polaroids always are, but clear enough that there was no mistaking what I was looking at. I stood there in my doorway for what felt like forever, just staring at this photograph. My hands started shaking. Someone had been in my bedroom while I was sleeping. Someone had stood at the foot of my bed with a camera and taken this picture. I immediately went back inside, locked the door, and called the building manager. He was an older guy named Cade who lived in the basement unit and handled maintenance issues. When he came up to my apartment, he looked at the photo and seemed genuinely concerned, but he insisted that he was the only person besides me who had keys to my unit, and he kept them locked in a safe in his apartment. He suggested maybe it was from a previous tenant, some kind of prank or leftover item, but that made no sense. This was clearly my bed, my current bedding, and Walter, whom I had only adopted a few weeks ago. Cade offered to change my locks anyway, just to be safe, and he did so that same afternoon. I felt a little better after that, convinced myself it was some weird one-time thing. Maybe someone had gotten in before I moved in, or maybe Cade was lying about being the only one with keys. Either way, new locks meant new security. I could move on from this. I started being more careful about checking that my door was locked at night, and I pushed a chair against my bedroom door before going to sleep. Walter seemed unbothered by everything, which was somewhat comforting. Cats can sense things, right? If something was really wrong, he would act strange. The second Polaroid appeared exactly 1 week later, the following Tuesday. Same thing, slipped under my door overnight. This time the photo was taken from a different angle, from the left side of my bed near my nightstand. I was sleeping on my back in this one arm thrown above my head. Walter was on the windowsill in the background. The photo was time-stamped in the corner with a small date sticker, the kind you can buy at any craft store. It was from the night before. Someone had been in my apartment the previous night, just hours ago, while I slept. I completely panicked. I called the police this time, not just Cade. 2 officers came to my apartment and took a report. They were polite, but I could tell they didn't know what to make of it. There were no signs of forced entry. The locks were new and intact. The windows were all locked from the inside. They suggested I install a security camera, which I did immediately. I ordered one online and had it installed in my bedroom by that weekend, pointed at my bed. I also got a camera for my front door. If anyone was coming in, I would have video evidence. The third Polaroid came the next Tuesday. I found it under my door when I woke up, and this one was taken from the right side of my bed, near the closet. The angle was different again. Whoever was doing this was moving around my room, taking photos from different positions. I immediately checked my security camera footage from the night before. I watched the entire 8 hours of recording from when I went to bed until when I woke up. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The footage showed me sleeping peacefully all night. Walter jumping on and off the bed a few times. But no one else entered the room. No movement, no shadows. Nothing that could explain the photograph. I called the police again and showed them the footage. They were as confused as I was. One officer suggested maybe the camera had a blind spot, or maybe someone had hacked it and was looping footage. But the camera was brand new, and the technical specs indicated it covered the entire room. They filed another report and said they would increase patrols in the area, but I could tell they thought I was either lying or crazy. Cade came up again, and we checked every single window, every possible entry point. Everything was secure. He even checked the crawl space above my unit. Nothing. The Polaroids kept coming, every single Tuesday morning like clockwork, each one from a different angle. Week 4 was from the corner near my dresser. Week 5 was from near the bathroom door. Week 6 was from the foot of the bed again, but closer this time. I stopped sleeping well. I would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting to hear something, anything that would explain what was happening. I started staying at hotels on Monday nights, thinking maybe if I wasn't there, the photos would stop. But they didn't. Even on nights I wasn't home, a new photo would appear on Tuesday morning, except those showed my empty bed with Walter sleeping alone. Walter started acting strange around week 7. He would sit in the middle of my bedroom floor around 3 in the morning, every single night, and stare at the same corner of the ceiling near the window. Not occasionally. Every night. Same time, same spot. His pupils would dilate, his tail would puff up slightly, and he would just stare. I would follow his gaze but see nothing. Just the corner where the wall met the ceiling. A small water stain from an old leak. Nothing unusual, but Walter was fixated on it. The worst Polaroid came on week 8. I knew it would be there when I woke up, and I almost didn't want to look. But I opened my door, and there it was. This photo was different. It was taken from above, from that exact corner of the ceiling where Walter always stared. The angle showed my entire bed, from a bird's eye view, and in the corner of the photo, barely visible but definitely there, was a dark shape. It wasn't quite a shadow, and it wasn't quite solid. It was like smoke or fog, but with an almost human outline. It was positioned right where the camera would have been, right where someone or something would have been standing to take this photo. I packed a bag that morning and left. I didn't tell Cade. I didn't call the police again. I just left. I stayed with a friend in Fremont and never went back except to get my things when Cade was there with me. I broke my lease and lost my deposit, but I didn't care. The landlord was angry but I didn't explain why I was leaving. What would I even say? That someone or something was photographing me in my sleep from impossible angles. That my cat could see something I couldn't. That I had 8 Polaroid photos of myself sleeping and no explanation for how they were taken. I moved to a modern apartment building in Queen Anne with security guards and keycard access. I still have Walter, and he doesn't stare at ceilings anymore. But I kept all 8 Polaroids. I don't know why. Maybe because they're the only proof I have that I wasn't losing my mind. Sometimes, late at night, I take them out and look at them, especially that last one with the dark shape in the corner. I've tried to enhance it on my computer, zoom in, adjust the contrast, but it never becomes clearer. It just stays there, a dark presence in the corner of the frame, watching me sleep. I never found out what was happening in that Capitol Hill apartment. Cade still texts me occasionally, asking if I'm okay, which is strange because we weren't close. The building is still there on 15th Ave East, and I drive past it sometimes, on my way to meet clients. I always look up at my old window on the 3rd floor and wonder if someone new lives there now. I wonder if they've found any Polaroids under their door on Tuesday mornings. I wonder if their cat stares at the ceiling at 3 a.m., but I never stop to check. Some questions are better left unanswered. My name is Otto, and I've been working as an ER nurse at Harborview Medical Center for almost 15 years now. I've seen things in this job that would make most people quit after a month. Trauma cases, gunshot wounds, overdoses, the kind of stuff that stays with you long after your shift ends. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened to me in the basement of the old psychiatric wing on a Tuesday night shift last October. Harborview is a massive hospital complex on First Hill, and if you know anything about Seattle's medical system, you know this is where they send the worst cases. It's a level 1 trauma center, which means we get everything from car accidents on I-5 to stabbings from downtown. The main hospital is modern, updated, full of the latest equipment. But there are older sections, wings that date back decades, parts of the building most staff never see. The old psychiatric ward is one of those places. It was shut down back in the early 90s, when they built the new behavioral health building across the street. Since then, it's mostly been used for storage, old records, equipment that's waiting to be surplused out. Most of us forget it even exists. I usually work the night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I prefer it, actually. The chaos is different at night. Fewer scheduled surgeries, more emergencies, and there's something about the quiet hours between 3 and 5 in the morning that I've always found peaceful, even in an ER. That particular night started like any other. We had a steady flow of patients, but nothing overwhelming. Around 2 in the morning, my supervisor, Angelo, came up to me looking frustrated. He's a good guy, been at Harborview even longer than me, but he hates dealing with administrative nonsense. Angelo told me that some lawyers needed patient files from 1982 for a lawsuit, something about medical malpractice that was just inside the statute of limitations. The files were stored in the basement archive of the old psychiatric wing. Normally, medical records would handle this during business hours, but apparently this was urgent, and the lawyers were willing to pay extra for after-hours retrieval. Angelo asked if I could go down there during my break and pull the files. He gave me a list of patient numbers and a key card that would access the old wing. I wasn't thrilled about it, but it was overtime pay and my break was coming up anyway. I headed over around 2:30 in the morning. The old psychiatric wing is connected to the main hospital through a series of tunnels and corridors that most patients never see. These are the paths we use to move bodies to the morgue, to transport equipment between buildings, the behind-the-scenes arteries of the hospital. I walked through the familiar tunnels, then through a section I'd only been through once or twice before. The lighting got dimmer the further I went. Some of the fluorescent bulbs were burned out and hadn't been replaced. My footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. I used the key card to access a heavy metal door marked psychiatric archives, authorized personnel only. The door was stiff, like it hadn't been opened in months, and it made this loud scraping sound against the floor. Beyond it was a stairwell going down. The air immediately felt different, colder and stale, like a basement that hasn't had proper ventilation in years. I took the stairs down 2 flights and came to another door. This one wasn't locked. It just pushed open into a long hallway lined with file rooms. The basement was exactly what you'd expect from a decommissioned hospital wing. Dim emergency lighting, that greenish tint that makes everything look sickly. The floor was old linoleum tile, some of it cracked and peeling. There were gurneys pushed against the walls, outdated medical equipment covered in dust, boxes of supplies that probably expired before I even started working here. The file rooms had windows with wire mesh glass, and I could see rows and rows of filing cabinets inside each one. I checked the list Angelo gave me and started looking for the right room. The filing system was old school, organized by year and patient number. I found the 1982 files in the 3rd room I checked. The door creaked when I opened it, and the light switch didn't work, so I had to use my phone flashlight to read the cabinet labels. I was searching through the drawers when I heard it. Singing. A child's voice, singing a nursery rhyme. It was faint and distant, coming from somewhere deeper in the basement, further down the hallway. I stopped what I was doing and listened. The voice was young, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and they were singing Ring Around the Rosie. The melody was slow and deliberate, each word drawn out in that eerie way kids sometimes sing when they're playing alone. My first thought was that somehow a child had wandered down here, maybe a patient's kid who got lost. But that made no sense. The pediatric ward was 3 floors up in the main building, and there were multiple locked doors between there and here. No child could have accessed this area. I stepped out into the hallway and called out, asking if anyone was there. The singing stopped immediately. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. I stood there for a minute, listening to my own breathing and the distant hum of the hospital's ventilation system somewhere above. Then the singing started again, same song, same slow melody, but now it sounded closer. It was coming from the far end of the hallway past several more file rooms, toward a section I hadn't explored yet. Every logical part of my brain was telling me to grab the files and leave, but 15 years of emergency medicine teaches you to assess situations, to investigate before jumping to conclusions. I thought maybe there was a radio down here, some old equipment still plugged in and picking up a signal. Or maybe the ventilation system was carrying sound from another part of the hospital in a weird way. I've seen stranger things explained by building acoustics, so I walked toward the sound. The hallway extended further than I expected, taking a turn to the left. The emergency lighting was even worse here, with long stretches of complete darkness between functioning bulbs. I used my phone light to see where I was going. The singing continued, still that same nursery rhyme, over and over. As I got closer, I could hear it more clearly. It wasn't a recording. The voice had too much variance, too much personality. A real child was singing somewhere in this basement. I came to an intersection where the hallway split in 3 directions. The singing was coming from the left corridor. This section of the basement looked even older, with exposed pipes along the ceiling and water stains on the walls. There were rooms here too, but these weren't file storage. I could see through the windows that they were old patient rooms, still containing metal bed frames and institutional furniture. This must have been part of the actual psychiatric ward, the rooms where patients stayed. The singing stopped again when I turned down this corridor. I called out one more time, saying I was a nurse, and that if someone needed help, I was here to assist. No response. Just silence and the sound of my own footsteps. I checked several of the rooms, pushing open doors that hadn't been opened in years, empty beds, old medical charts still hanging on walls, a wheelchair in one corner, everything covered in years of dust and neglect. Then I saw the footprints, small footprints in the dust on the floor, leading from the hallway into one of the rooms. They were the size a child would make, barefoot, and they looked recent. The dust around them was undisturbed, but these prints were clear and defined. I followed them into the room, and that's when the singing started again, right behind me in the hallway I had just been standing in. I spun around, and there was nothing there. Empty hallway, the same dim lighting, the same oppressive silence behind the singing voice. But now the voice sounded like it was moving, traveling down the corridor away from me. I stepped back into the hallway and watched as the sound retreated, getting fainter as if someone was walking away while singing. I started following it, walking faster now, my phone light sweeping back and forth across the hallway. The singing led me deeper into the basement, through sections I didn't even know existed. The architecture changed, became older, more institutional. I passed through what looked like an old day room, with tables and chairs still arranged as if waiting for patients who would never come. The voice stayed ahead of me, always just out of sight, leading me further in. Then suddenly it stopped. Complete silence. I was standing in a hallway I didn't recognize, with no idea which direction I had come from. That's when the real fear hit me. I wasn't just creeped out anymore. I was genuinely lost in a basement that probably hadn't been accessed in years. I tried to retrace my steps, but every corridor looked the same in the dark. I pulled out my phone to call Angelo, but there was no signal down here. The concrete and earth above me were blocking everything. I was alone in the abandoned psychiatric wing with no way to contact anyone. I picked a direction and started walking, trying to find my way back to the archives. I must have wandered for 20 minutes, passing through rooms and hallways that all blurred together. Finally, I saw something familiar. The file room where I had originally been searching. I practically ran to it, grabbed the first file folder my hands touched, and got out of there. I didn't care if it was the right patient file or not. I just needed to leave. The walk back through the tunnels to the main hospital felt like it took forever. When I finally made it back to the ER, Angelo took one look at me and asked if I was okay. I must have looked terrible because he brought me water and made me sit down. I told him I got the file, handed it over, and said the basement was creepy as hell. He laughed and said he would have sent someone else if he'd known it would shake me up. I didn't tell him about the singing or the footprints. What would I even say? Later that week, I looked up the patient file I had grabbed. It was labeled Patient Number 447, a child admitted to the psychiatric ward in March of 1982 for severe behavioral issues. According to the notes, the child disappeared from a locked room on the 4th night of admission. There was an investigation, searches of the entire building, but the child was never found. The case was eventually closed as a runaway, though the notes indicated the staff didn't understand how a child could have escaped from a locked psychiatric ward 3 floors up. I still work night shifts at Harborview. I still walk through those tunnels to get from one building to another. But I've never gone back down to that basement, and I never will. Sometimes during quiet moments in the early morning hours, I think about that singing voice and those small footprints in the dust. I think about a child who disappeared from a locked room 40 years ago and wonder if they ever really left the building at all. What do you think happened to that child? Could someone really be living in those forgotten basement corridors? Or was I hearing something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. My name is Remington, and I drive for one of those rideshare apps. I've been doing it for about 3 years now, mostly night shifts because the pay is better and there's less traffic to deal with. I know Seattle pretty well at this point. Every neighborhood, every shortcut, every spot where cops like to sit and catch speeders. I've had all kinds of passengers. Drunk college kids heading home from Capitol Hill bars, airport runs at 4 in the morning, business people who tip well, people who smell like they haven't showered in weeks. You learn not to judge, just drive and collect your fare. But what happened to me 6 months ago on a February night has made me seriously consider finding a different line of work. It was a Saturday night, or technically very early Sunday morning, around 2 a.m. I'd been driving since 8 the previous evening, and was planning to call it quits after maybe 1 or 2 more rides. The money had been good that night, lots of bar closures, and people needing rides home. I was in Fremont when I got a ping for a pickup near the Aurora Bridge. The pickup location showed a spot right at the north end of the bridge, which seemed odd because there's not much up there except the road and some industrial areas, but I accepted it anyway. I drove up Aurora Avenue toward the bridge. If you've never been to Seattle, the Aurora Bridge is this massive green steel structure that crosses over the Lake Washington Ship Canal, connecting different parts of the city. It's high, really high, and it has a reputation. Too many people have jumped from it over the years. They eventually installed crisis hotline phones and added some barriers, but it's still a place that carries a heavy feeling, especially at night when there's hardly any traffic. I pulled up to the exact pin location the app showed me. It was right at the edge of the bridge approach, near one of those emergency call boxes. There was a figure standing there on the sidewalk, and I could see right away that something was off. The person was completely soaked, water dripping from their clothes and hair, creating a small puddle on the concrete. It hadn't rained that night. It was actually clear and cold, one of those rare winter nights in Seattle where you can see stars. The passenger opened the back door and got in without saying anything. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw it was someone younger than me, maybe mid-20s, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie that clung to their body from being wet. Their hair was plastered to their head, and water was literally dripping off them onto my back seat. I almost said something about the mess, but decided against it. Maybe they'd fallen in the canal somehow, or their car had broken down and they'd gotten caught in some kind of water main break. Seattle has weird stuff happen all the time. I asked where they were heading, trying to sound friendly and professional. The passenger didn't look up, just said an address in Ballard in this flat, quiet voice. I punched it into my GPS and started driving. The route took me across the bridge and then down through Fremont toward Ballard. The whole time my passenger sat completely still in the back seat, staring straight ahead. I tried making small conversation, asking if they were okay, if they needed me to turn up the heat since they were wet. No response. Just silence and the sound of water dripping onto my floor mats. We crossed the Ballard Bridge and headed into the neighborhood. The address they'd given me was on a residential street near the Ship Canal. When I pulled up to the location, I realized it wasn't a house or an apartment building. It was an empty lot, just a chain-link fence surrounding overgrown grass and blackberry bushes. There was a streetlight nearby, but it was flickering, giving everything this unstable, uncertain illumination. I told my passenger we'd arrived, keeping my voice neutral even though I was starting to feel uneasy. I looked in the rearview mirror to see their reaction. The back seat was empty. Completely empty. No person, no wet clothes, nothing. And here's the thing that really got me. The seat wasn't even wet. I reached back and touched the upholstery where this person had been sitting for the past 15 minutes. Completely dry. I checked the floor mats. Dry. No puddles, no water, no evidence anyone had been there at all. I sat there for a minute trying to process what had just happened. I checked the app on my phone to make sure I hadn't imagined the whole thing. The ride was logged there, the pickup location at Aurora Bridge, the drop-off at this empty lot. The passenger's profile showed a blank avatar and a name that was just random letters, the kind of default name the app assigns when someone doesn't fill out their profile. But the ride had definitely happened. I had driven someone across town, or at least I thought I had. I got out of my car and walked around to the back door they had used. I opened it and examined the seat carefully. There was nothing. No moisture, no sign anyone had been sitting there. I felt the seat, smelled it even, thinking maybe I was losing my mind. Everything was normal and dry. I looked around the empty lot, half expecting to see someone standing there watching me, but the street was deserted. Just flickering streetlights and the sound of water moving in the nearby canal. I got back in my car and just sat there, hands shaking a little bit. I've never been the kind of person who believes in supernatural stuff. I'm practical, logical, the type who looks for rational explanations. But I couldn't explain this. I'd seen someone get in my car, watched them in my mirror during the drive, heard them give me an address, but now there was no evidence they had ever existed. I drove home after that, didn't accept any more rides. I live in West Seattle, and the drive back gave me time to think. Maybe I'd been more tired than I realized. Maybe I had dozed off somehow and dreamed the whole thing, except the ride was logged in the app with timestamps and everything. Maybe it was carbon monoxide in my car making me hallucinate, except I'd just had the car serviced the week before. Every explanation I came up with fell apart when I examined it. The next day, I drove back to that empty lot in Ballard during daylight, needing to see it again. It looked different in the sun, less ominous, just an abandoned piece of property waiting for development. There was a faded for sale sign attached to the chain link fence with a real estate agent's phone number. I walked around the perimeter and noticed something I'd missed the night before. On the canal side of the lot, there was a concrete boat launch ramp that went down into the water. It was old and cracked, covered in moss, clearly hadn't been used in years. I stood there looking at that ramp and got a cold feeling in my stomach. I took out my phone and searched for drownings in the ship canal. There were several over the years, mostly accidents, a few suspected suicides. Then I found one from 3 years ago that made me stop scrolling. A person in their mid-20s had been reported missing after leaving a bar in Fremont. Their body was found 2 weeks later in the ship canal near Ballard. The news article included a photo. I recognized the face immediately. It was my passenger from the night before. I went down a research rabbit hole after that, spending hours searching for information. I found the missing person report, the news coverage of the body being found, even the obituary. The pickup location I'd gotten, right at the Aurora Bridge, that was less than a quarter mile from where this person was last seen alive, at a bar in Fremont. The drop-off location, the empty lot with the boat ramp, that was almost exactly where their body had been found in the canal. The date I'd given them the ride was the 3-year anniversary of their disappearance, down to the exact day. I tried telling myself it was coincidence. Maybe I'd seen the news coverage years ago, and my tired brain had manufactured a hallucination based on stored memories. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank, though I couldn't imagine how or why. But none of those explanations felt right. What I kept coming back to was what my passenger had said, the only words they'd spoken. The address in Ballard. They'd given me that address clearly and specifically, leading me directly to the spot where their body had been found. I kept driving for the rideshare company after that, mostly because I needed the money, but I changed my patterns. I stopped accepting rides near the Aurora Bridge. I stopped driving after midnight. Whenever I got a passenger, I would glance in the rearview mirror multiple times during the trip, making sure they stayed solid and real and present. Most of them probably thought I was weird or paranoid, checking on them constantly. But I didn't care. About a month after the incident, I was talking to another driver at a gas station near Green Lake. We got to chatting about the job, comparing stories about difficult passengers and good tipping spots. I mentioned, casually, that the Aurora Bridge area gave me bad vibes. He looked at me strangely and said I wasn't the first driver he'd heard say that. He told me there were stories, rumors really, about drivers picking up passengers near that bridge late at night who would disappear from the back seat, always heading to Ballard, always soaking wet. He'd never experienced it himself, but he knew 2 other drivers who claimed it happened to them. I still have the ride logged in my app history. Sometimes I look at it, just to confirm it really happened, and I didn't imagine the whole thing. The timestamp, the route, the fare amount, it's all there in the data. The passenger profile is still active too, that blank avatar and random letter name. I've thought about trying to contact the app company, reporting what happened, but what would I even say? That I picked up someone who's been dead for 3 years. They'd deactivate my account and probably suggest I see a therapist. I've done that drive from the Aurora Bridge to that empty lot in Ballard dozens of times since then, always during the day, always with other passengers going to different destinations. It's a normal route, a normal part of the city. But I can't help thinking about it every time. I think about my passengers sitting silently in the back seat, dripping water that wasn't really there, heading to a location that marked the end of their life. I think about how they said that address so clearly, as if they'd been trying to get there for 3 years and finally found someone who could take them. Have you ever given someone a ride and felt like something was deeply wrong, even if you couldn't explain why? Let me know in the comments what you would have done. My name is Oakley, and I'm 22 years old. I go to the University of Washington studying communications and trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, like most college students. Money has always been tight for me since I'm paying my own way through school, so I take whatever jobs I can find to make ends meet. Last summer, I found what seemed like the perfect gig. A family friend of my roommate needed someone to house sit for 2 weeks at their place up near Cottage Lake, which is about 30 minutes north of Seattle. The pay was generous, way more than I'd make working retail, and all I had to do was water some plants, collect the mail, and make sure the house didn't burn down. It seemed almost too easy. The family was named the Ellis family, and they were loaded. The husband worked in tech, something with software development, and they had this massive house right on the water. My roommate Fable had known them for years through her parents and vouched that they were nice people. When Fable told me about the opportunity, she mentioned they didn't have any kids, which I thought was weird given how huge their house was. But rich people do strange things with their money, so I didn't think much of it. They were going to be in Europe for 2 weeks and just needed someone responsible to stay at the place. The timing was perfect, since it was between summer term and fall quarter, and I didn't have anywhere else I needed to be. Fable drove me up there on a Saturday afternoon in late August. The house was even more impressive in person than in the photos she'd shown me. It was a modern design with lots of glass and wood, situated on about 2 acres of property that sloped down to the lake. There was a dock with a small boat tied to it, a perfectly maintained lawn, and gardens that clearly had professional landscaping. Inside was just as nice, all high-end furniture and artwork, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and huge windows everywhere that gave views of the water. The husband met us there to show me around and give me the keys. His name was Phoenix, probably in his late 40s, wearing expensive casual clothes and driving a Tesla. He seemed friendly enough, but distracted, like he had a million things on his mind. He walked me through the house quickly, showing me where everything was, how to work the security system, where they kept spare light bulbs and cleaning supplies. He emphasized that I should make myself at home, use whatever I needed, and not to worry about being too careful with things. He mentioned the Wi-Fi password and said I could use their streaming services, help myself to anything in the fridge or pantry. Then we got to the basement. The house had a finished basement with a home theater, a gym area, and what Phoenix called his workshop, where he kept tools and equipment. He showed me all of that, and then we walked down a hallway, and he stopped at a door at the very end. The door was painted white, like all the others, but this one had a deadbolt lock on it, the kind that needs a key from both sides. Phoenix pulled out his key ring and made a point of showing me which key went to that lock. Then he looked at me very seriously and said I was not to open that door under any circumstances. It was storage for valuable equipment and some things that were sentimental to his wife, and they preferred nobody go in there. He said it almost apologetically, like he felt bad for having a restriction, but he was very clear about it. I told him no problem. It was his house, and I'd respect his privacy. He seemed relieved and handed me the keys, minus the one for that locked door which he kept on his own ring. Fable and I helped him load some last-minute items into his car. He reminded me one more time about the door, and then he left. Fable hung around for another hour helping me get settled. Then she headed back to Seattle. Suddenly I was alone in this massive, expensive house, and it felt surreal. The first few days were honestly great. I spent my time reading by the lake, swimming off the dock, exploring the property. The area around Cottage Lake is quiet and woodsy, much different from the city. At night, I'd make dinner in their amazing kitchen, watch movies on their giant TV, and sleep in the comfortable guest room they'd set up for me on the main floor. It was like a vacation. I video chatted with Fable a couple times and told her this was the easiest money I'd ever made. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about that locked door. It was human nature, right? Tell someone not to look at something, and that's all they can think about. I kept wondering what could be so important that it needed to be locked away like that. Expensive computer equipment seemed like the obvious answer, or maybe some collectibles, art pieces, things that would be attractive to thieves. The sentimental items belonging to his wife made sense too. Maybe it was her personal space, and she didn't want a stranger going through her things. On the fifth night, things started feeling different. I was downstairs using the treadmill in the gym area around 9 p.m. The basement had windows near the ceiling that looked out at ground level, and it was getting dark outside. I was running with headphones in, listening to music, when I thought I heard something over the sound of the treadmill and my playlist. I pulled out one earbud and listened. There it was again. Footsteps. Small footsteps. They sounded like they were coming from above me, on the main floor, quick and light like a child running. I stopped the treadmill and stood there listening. The footsteps continued, moving from what sounded like the living room toward the kitchen. I grabbed my phone and slowly went upstairs, my heart beating hard. I checked every room on the main floor. Nothing. All the doors and windows were locked. The security system was still armed. Nobody was there. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, or maybe it was the house settling, or an animal on the roof. Old houses make noise, even expensive modern ones. The footsteps happened again 2 nights later. This time I was in the kitchen making a late dinner around 10 p.m. I heard them clearly, running across the floor above me on the second level. I went upstairs immediately and checked every bedroom, every closet, every bathroom. Nothing. But here's what bothered me. The second floor had thick carpet throughout. Footsteps shouldn't sound that loud and clear on carpet. They should be muffled. These sounded like someone running on hardwood floors. I started feeling uneasy after that. I'd be sitting in the living room and get the distinct feeling someone was watching me. I'd spin around and see nothing, just empty rooms, and those big windows reflecting darkness outside. I began leaving more lights on at night. I stopped using the basement gym because being down there alone made me nervous. I thought about calling Phoenix to ask if the house had any quirks I should know about, but I didn't want to sound crazy or paranoid. This was easy money, and I needed it. On the 8th night, I was lying in the guest bed trying to fall asleep when I heard it again. Footsteps. But this time they were in the basement. I could hear them through the floor vent, that same quick patter of small feet running. My bedroom was directly above the basement hallway, the one that led to the locked door. I lay there, frozen, listening as the footsteps ran down that hallway and then stopped. Right at that door. Then I heard something that made my blood go cold. Scratching. Someone was scratching at the door from the inside, fingernails dragging across wood, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, went to the basement door, and stood at the top of the stairs listening. The scratching continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Silence. I waited there for 10 minutes, but heard nothing else. I didn't go down to check. I went back to my room, locked the door, and barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning, I called Fable and told her everything. She listened quietly and then said something that made me feel worse, not better. She said she'd known the Ellis family for years, and they'd never mentioned having children. Ever. She'd been to their house for dinners and holiday parties, and had never seen any evidence of kids. No toys, no photos of children, nothing. When I asked why they'd have a locked room then, she got quiet and said maybe I should just leave, that she'd explained to them I had a family emergency. But I didn't leave. I wish I had, but I only had 4 more days and I really needed the money. Plus, it was daytime and everything seemed less scary in the sunlight. I decided I'd tough it out, maybe stay up late watching movies so I'd be tired enough to sleep through any noises. That worked for one night. But on night 10, something happened that I still can't fully process. I woke up around 3 in the morning to complete silence, the kind of silence that feels wrong, too heavy and thick. I opened my eyes and realized my bedroom door was open. I always locked it before bed, had been locking it every night since the scratching incident, but now it stood wide open, and the hallway beyond was dark. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight app with shaking hands. The beam swept across my room and then out into the hallway. There were wet footprints on the hardwood floor, small footprints child-sized, leading from the direction of the basement stairs down the hallway past my room. They were perfectly formed, like someone had stepped in water and was tracking it through the house. I followed them with my phone light. They went down the hall, turned at the living room, and led to the big glass doors that opened onto the deck overlooking the lake. The doors were closed and locked. The footprints stopped right there at the glass. But here's what terrified me. The footprints were on the inside of the glass, but there were more footprints on the outside of the glass on the deck, as if someone had walked through the locked doors. I turned on every light in the house and called Fable. It was 3 in the morning, but I didn't care. She answered sounding groggy, and I told her everything in a rush, barely making sense. She said she was coming to get me right then, that I should pack my stuff and wait outside. I threw my things in my bag as fast as I could and went out to sit on the front porch. I didn't want to be in that house for another second. While I waited, I found myself staring at the wet footprints still visible on the deck in the glow from the house lights. They led from the door to the edge of the deck, then down the steps toward the dock. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and followed them, staying far enough back that I felt safe but close enough to see. The prints went all the way down to the dock, to the very end where the boat was tied. And then they just stopped. Like whoever made them had walked off the dock into the dark water. Fable arrived about 40 minutes later, and I've never been so happy to see someone in my life. I left the keys on the kitchen counter with a note saying I'd had a family emergency and had to leave early. I didn't explain about the footprints or the noises. When Phoenix contacted me a week later, asking what happened, I gave him some vague excuse about a sick relative. He seemed understanding and paid me for the full 2 weeks anyway, but I never stopped thinking about that locked door in the basement and what might have been behind it. I never stopped wondering about those small footprints or why a family with no children would have someone trying to get out of a locked room. Fable did some digging later, searching property records and news archives. She found something from 15 years ago, a brief mention in a local paper about a drowning at a private residence on Cottage Lake, a child. The details were sparse, and the article mentioned the family wished to keep the matter private. I don't know what I experienced in that house. Maybe it was my imagination running wild. Maybe there's a logical explanation I'm missing. But those footprints were real. The scratching was real. And that locked door definitely contained something the Ellis family never wanted anyone to know about. If you found a locked door in a house you were staying in, would you open it even if you were told not to? Tell me what you think was behind that door. My name is Tobias, and I've been working at Pike Place Market for almost 30 years now. I run a small seafood stand on the main level. Same spot since 1995. If you've ever visited Seattle, you've probably been to the market. It's one of those iconic tourist spots, always crowded with people taking photos of the fish throwers, buying flowers, eating chowder. But the market most visitors see is just the surface. Below the busy main arcade, there's a whole network of storage rooms, old passages, and tunnels that date back over 100 years. Most vendors know their way around down there because that's where we keep our extra inventory, supplies, equipment that doesn't fit in our small retail spaces upstairs. I've been going down to those storage areas almost daily for 3 decades. I know them as well as I know my own apartment. There's a main corridor that runs under the market with branching passages leading to different storage rooms. Some areas are well lit and maintained, others are dimmer and kind of forgotten. The city has done renovations over the years, but there are sections that probably haven't changed much since the early 1900s. You learn which routes are fastest, which doors stick, which light switches actually work. It becomes routine, just part of the job. What happened to me last November was anything but routine. It was a Wednesday evening, around 7 p.m. The market closes to customers at 6, but vendors usually stick around for another hour or so, doing cleanup, restocking, paperwork, that kind of thing. I had finished cleaning my display cases and needed to grab some supplies from our storage locker downstairs. I do this all the time, nothing unusual about it. I told my employee Atticus I'd be back in 10 minutes and headed down. The entrance I use is through a door behind the main fish throwing area, down a concrete staircase that's worn smooth from decades of foot traffic. The stairwell always smells like salt water and old concrete. I went down 2 flights and came out into the main corridor. The lighting down there is a mix of old incandescent bulbs and newer LED fixtures they installed a few years back. Some sections are bright, others have that yellowish dim glow that makes everything look kind of sickly. I walked down the familiar hallway toward my storage unit, which is about halfway through the corridor on the left side. I was thinking about inventory I needed to order, not paying much attention to my surroundings because I'd walked this route thousands of times. I unlocked my storage room, grabbed the boxes of supplies I needed, and started heading back. That's when I realized I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. I was in a section of the corridor I didn't recognize. The walls were different, older-looking brick instead of the painted concrete I was used to. The ceiling was lower, with exposed pipes running along it. The lighting was dimmer too, just a few bare bulbs spaced far apart. I stopped and looked around, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. I'm not someone who gets lost easily, especially not in a place I know this well. But somehow I'd ended up in a passage I'd never seen before. I decided to backtrack, retrace my steps to the storage room and start over. But when I turned around, the corridor behind me looked the same as the one ahead. Just dim brick passages with old pipes and inadequate lighting. I picked a direction and walked, figuring I'd eventually hit a landmark I recognized or find a stairwell back up to the main market level. The passages kept going, turning at odd angles, occasionally branching off into side corridors. Everything looked subtly unfamiliar. I walked for maybe 5 minutes, getting more confused and slightly anxious. I'm 58 years old, and I've worked in this market for 30 years. The idea that there were entire sections I'd never encountered seemed impossible. The market isn't that big. I should have run into something familiar by now, or found stairs, or at least heard sounds from above where other vendors were still working. But it was quiet down here, just the hum of ventilation somewhere distant, and my own footsteps echoing off the brick. Then I found the room. It was off to the left, down a short side passage that ended at a wooden door. The door was old, really old, made of heavy wood with iron hinges that looked like they'd been there for a century. There was no lock, just a simple latch. The door was slightly ajar, and light was coming from inside. Not electric light, something warmer and more flickering, like candlelight or oil lamps. I should have turned around right then. Every instinct told me to leave, find my way back, forget this whole thing. But curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open wider and looked inside. It was a small room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with brick walls and a dirt floor. In the center was a wooden table and a single wooden chair. On the table was food, fresh food. A plate with what looked like grilled salmon, still steaming slightly, and a cup of coffee that I could smell from the doorway. That specific Seattle coffee smell, dark roast, strong. The room was lit by 2 old-fashioned oil lamps sitting on small shelves mounted to the walls. The lamps were actually burning, real flames behind glass chimneys. I stood there in the doorway, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't a storage room. This was set up like someone's living space, or at least their eating area. And the food was fresh, recently prepared. The salmon looked like it had just come off a grill minutes ago. I stepped into the room, still holding my boxes of supplies. I looked at the food more closely. The salmon was seasoned the way we prepare it at the market, with pepper and lemon. The coffee mug was a plain white ceramic one, the kind you could buy at any restaurant supply store. Whoever had been eating this meal had left very recently. The coffee was still hot, enough that I could see steam rising from it. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were coming from deeper in the tunnels, from somewhere beyond this room in a direction I hadn't explored yet. The footsteps were deliberate and steady, boot heels on stone, getting closer. Someone was walking toward this room, toward me. I backed out quickly, pulling the door mostly closed the way I'd found it. I didn't know who was down here or what this place was, but I suddenly felt like I was somewhere I absolutely should not be. I hurried back down the short passage toward the main corridor, my heart pounding. The footsteps behind me stopped. I reached the main corridor and turned right, walking fast but trying not to run. I needed to find a way out, get back to familiar territory. The passages kept twisting, and I had no idea which direction I was going. I came to an intersection where 3 corridors met and stopped to catch my breath and think. That's when I heard it. A voice, distant but clear, calling out. It wasn't calling to me specifically, just calling out into the tunnels. The voice had a strange quality to it, hard to describe. It sounded wrong somehow, like it was being played on an old recording device, slightly distorted and not quite matching the acoustics of the space. The words were unclear, but the tone was questioning, searching. I picked the corridor that angled upward slightly, hoping it would lead to stairs or an exit. I walked quickly, glancing back over my shoulder every few seconds. The voice called out again, closer now. I could hear the footsteps too, that same steady rhythm of boots on stone, echoing through the passages. Whoever was down here was following me, tracking my movement through the tunnels. I turned a corner and saw something that gave me hope. There was a door ahead with an exit sign above it, the kind of modern safety signs with LED lighting. I reached it and pushed through, climbing a metal staircase that definitely hadn't existed back in the market's early days. This was modern construction, probably from some renovation in the past 20 years. I climbed 2 flights and came out through another door into a section of the market I recognized. I was near the north end, close to the entrance. I'd somehow traveled much further through the tunnels than I'd realized. The market was mostly empty now, just a few vendors finishing their closing routines. Everything looked normal and familiar and safe. I went back to my stand where Atticus was waiting, looking slightly annoyed that I'd taken so long. He asked if everything was okay because apparently I looked shaken up. I told him I'd gotten turned around in the storage areas, which was technically true. I didn't mention the room, or the food, or the footsteps. What would I even say? I finished closing up and went home, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The next day, I came in early, before the market opened, and went back down to the storage areas. I tried to retrace my route from the night before, tried to find that unfamiliar section of tunnel. I walked through every corridor I could access, checked every branching passage. I couldn't find it. Everything down there looked like it always had, familiar and routine. The passage with the brick walls and the room with the table and food, they just weren't there. I asked some of the other longtime vendors if they knew about any unused sections of the storage tunnels. Most of them looked at me like I was crazy. One older woman who's been at the market even longer than me told me there were stories, rumors really, about people living in the tunnels over the years. Homeless folks who found their way into the forgotten sections and made temporary homes down there. She said back in the 80s, there was supposedly someone who lived under the market for months before being discovered. But she didn't know any specifics and thought it was probably just urban legend. I did some research at the public library, looking through old records and historical documents about Pike Place Market. The market has a long history, built in 1907, and the underground areas were used for all sorts of purposes over the decades. During Prohibition, there were supposedly speakeasies down there. In the Depression, people took shelter in the tunnels. There are stories about sealed-off sections that haven't been accessed in 50 years or more. The market is built on a hill, and the underground areas don't follow a logical layout. It's entirely possible there are rooms and passages that have been forgotten. But here's what bothers me most. That food on the table was fresh. The coffee was hot. The lamps were burning. That means someone is down there right now, living in those tunnels, somehow accessing the market to get food. Fresh salmon from our vendors. Coffee from one of the cafes. They're moving through sections of the market that the rest of us can't find, passages that shouldn't exist or have been blocked off for decades. I still work at the market, still go down to the storage areas when I need supplies, but I'm more careful now. I pay attention to where I'm going. I don't let my mind wander. And sometimes, late in the evening when the market is quiet and I'm down there alone, I think I can hear them. Footsteps in distant corridors. The sound of someone moving through those forgotten spaces beneath Seattle, living a life completely hidden from the thousands of people walking around upstairs. I've told this story to a few people, and most of them think I got confused or disoriented, that I wandered into some maintenance area I'd never noticed before. Maybe they're right. But I know what I saw. That room was set up like someone's home. That food was fresh enough that I could smell it. And those footsteps were real, following me through passages that I haven't been able to find again. The thing that keeps me up at night is this. If someone is living down there, how long have they been there? How do they move through the market without being seen? And what else is hidden in those tunnels beneath Pike Place Market that nobody knows about? Have you ever gotten lost somewhere you thought you knew well and found something that shouldn't exist? Share your experience below. My name is Leora, and I'm in my early 30s. I've been a runner for about 10 years now, ever since I quit smoking and decided to get my life together. Running became more than just exercise for me. It became therapy, meditation, a way to clear my head before the chaos of the day started. I live in the Wallingford neighborhood of Seattle, just a few blocks from Green Lake, which is perfect because the lake has this beautiful loop trail that's exactly 2.8 miles around. It's one of the most popular running spots in the city, always full of joggers, walkers, people with dogs, families with strollers. I'm training for my 3rd marathon, which means I'm out there almost every morning doing my miles. I like going early, around 5 a.m. before the sun comes up and before the trail gets too crowded. There's something peaceful about running in that pre-dawn darkness. Just me and a handful of other early morning regulars, the streetlights reflecting off the lake water, the city still mostly asleep. You see the same people out there at that hour, and over time you start to recognize faces even if you never actually talk to them. There's the older guy who power walks with hand weights, the woman with the golden retriever, the couple who run together holding hands. And then there was the jogger in the vintage running gear. I first noticed him about 3 months ago, sometime in late August. He was running the opposite direction from me, which meant we passed each other on the trail. Green Lake Loop is mostly a counterclockwise flow. Most people go that direction, but some folks prefer clockwise. This guy was going clockwise while I went counterclockwise, so we'd pass each other at some point during my run. What caught my attention was what he was wearing. Bright neon windbreaker, the kind that was popular in the late 80s or early 90s, with purple and teal geometric patterns, matching shorts in the same style. Even his running shoes looked old-fashioned, chunky and white with thick soles, nothing like the sleek minimalist shoes most runners wear now. The first few times I saw him, I figured he was just someone with a retro fashion sense. Or maybe he was wearing vintage stuff ironically the way some people do. Seattle has plenty of folks who shop at thrift stores and wear stuff from decades past. But something about him seemed off in a way I couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was how solitary he looked, or how focused he seemed, never looking around at the lake or the other people, just running with this steady mechanical rhythm. I started seeing him every single morning, same time, around 5:15 when I was about halfway through my loop, always in that same bright windbreaker and shorts, always running the opposite direction, always with that same focused expression, looking straight ahead. After a few weeks, it became part of my routine. I'd think to myself that I was about to pass the vintage runner guy, and sure enough he'd be coming around the bend. I'm a friendly person generally. I'll nod or smile at other regular runners, that acknowledgement between people who are out there putting in the work at an ungodly hour. But this guy never made eye contact, never acknowledged anyone. He'd run past like he was the only person on the trail, like the rest of us didn't exist. I found that a little odd, but not concerning. Some people zone out when they run, get into their own headspace. I respected that. Then one morning in early October, I decided to try something different. It was a clear morning, unusually so for Seattle in fall, and I was feeling good, energized. When I saw the vintage runner approaching from the opposite direction, I smiled directly at him and raised my hand in a small wave. Just being friendly, acknowledging our shared routine. He was about 20 feet away when I did this. He stopped running, just stopped dead in the middle of the trail. His expression changed from that focused blank look to something confused, almost startled. He was staring directly at me, and I realized his eyes were strange. They seemed unfocused, like he was looking at me but also through me at the same time. I slowed down, not sure what was happening. We stood there, maybe 15 feet apart. Both of us stopped on the trail. The sky was starting to lighten with pre-dawn gray, and I could see his face clearly now. That's when he spoke. His voice sounded distant and confused, like someone waking up from a dream. He said, "Can you see me?" Just those 4 words. "Can you see me?" The way he said it made my skin crawl. It wasn't a greeting or a joke. It was a genuine question, asked with what sounded like surprise and maybe fear. I didn't answer. Every instinct in my body was suddenly screaming at me to run. So I did. I took off, running faster than I normally would, my heart pounding not from exertion but from raw fear. I didn't look back. I completed my loop and went straight home, my hands shaking as I unlocked my door. I stood in my shower for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Why would someone ask if I could see them? It was a bizarre question. Maybe he was mentally ill, or on drugs, or just really weird. I tried to rationalize it, tried to find a normal explanation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong about that interaction. The look in his eyes, the tone of his voice, the way he'd seemed genuinely shocked that I'd acknowledged him. I decided I'd avoid Green Lake for a few days, run a different route, let this whole thing blow over. I didn't want another encounter with that guy. I managed to stay away for almost a week. But Green Lake was my favorite route, perfectly flat and measured, ideal for marathon training. The other routes near my house had hills, or weren't the right distance. By the following Wednesday, I convinced myself I was being ridiculous. It was one weird interaction with a strange person. Seattle has lots of odd characters. I'd just ignore him if I saw him again, not make eye contact, not engage. So I went back to my normal routine. 5 a.m., out the door, down to Green Lake, start my loop. I was about a mile in when I saw him again. Same vintage windbreaker, same running style coming toward me from the opposite direction. My stomach tightened, but I kept running, eyes forward, determined not to acknowledge him this time. We got closer, and I could see him in my peripheral vision. As we passed each other, I heard him say something, just a whisper really, but I heard it clearly. He said, "You're the first one in a long time." I didn't stop. I kept running, completed my loop, and when I got home, I did something I probably should have done a week earlier. I searched online for information about Green Lake and joggers and anything unusual. I found the normal stuff, articles about the park, running groups, safety tips. But then I tried a different search, adding words like ghost and haunting. That's when I found a discussion thread on a Seattle local forum from a few years ago. Someone had posted asking if anyone else had seen a jogger at Green Lake who seemed off or unusual. Several people responded describing encounters with a runner in vintage 80s or 90s gear who would appear and disappear, who never seemed to interact with anyone. One person said they'd tried to talk to this jogger, and he'd looked right through them, like they weren't there. Another person claimed they'd seen this same jogger for years, always in the same clothes, never aging. At the bottom of that thread, someone had posted a link to a news article from 1997. I clicked it, and my blood went cold. The article was about a local runner who'd had a heart attack while jogging around Green Lake. He was in his early 40s, an avid runner who did the loop every morning. He collapsed on the trail and wasn't found until 3 days later, when his body was discovered off the path in some bushes. The article included a photo. It was him, the vintage runner. Younger in the photo, but definitely the same person. Same face, same build. And he was wearing a bright neon windbreaker with geometric patterns. I sat at my computer for a long time, reading and rereading that article. The man's name was Holden. He died in October of 1997, 28 years ago. The article mentioned he was a dedicated runner who was out on the trail every single morning without fail, rain or shine. His body had been found near the west side of the lake, not far from the spot where I usually encountered the vintage jogger. I should have stopped running at Green Lake after that. Any rational person would have. But I'm stubborn, and I don't like being scared away from my routines. Plus, a part of me didn't fully believe what I was reading. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe this was someone who looked like the guy in the article, or a relative, and they wore his old clothes for sentimental reasons. I needed to know for sure. The next morning I went back. Same time, same route. I brought my phone and made sure it was charged and ready. When I saw the vintage runner approaching, I slowed down to a walk and took out my phone. I pulled up the photo from the 1997 article, the one showing Holden in his neon windbreaker. As he got closer, I held up my phone so the photo was visible. He stopped running again, about 10 feet away from me. He looked at the phone screen, then at me, then back at the screen. His expression was confused and sad, like someone trying to remember something important they'd forgotten. We stood there in the pre-dawn gray, just the two of us on that section of trail, nobody else around. I asked him, "Is this you? Is your name Holden?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the phone screen. Then he said, "I don't remember stopping. I was running, and then I just kept running. I run every morning. I've always run every morning." His voice had that same distant quality, like he was speaking from somewhere far away. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who's been dead for almost 3 decades but doesn't seem to know it? He looked at me with those unfocused eyes and said, "Am I dead? Is that why nobody sees me anymore?" I couldn't answer. I just stood there, frozen, while tears started running down my face for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Then he did something that broke my heart. He smiled just a little and said, "Thank you for seeing me. I've been so lonely." And then he started running again, continuing his counterclockwise loop around the lake. I watched him jog away into the gray morning, his neon windbreaker getting smaller and smaller until he rounded a bend and disappeared from view. I never saw him again after that morning. I kept running at Green Lake, kept going out at 5 a.m., but the vintage jogger never appeared again. I asked some of the other regular early morning runners if they'd ever seen someone in old-fashioned running gear. One older man said yes, years ago, but not recently. He said the same thing I'd read online, that the jogger seemed to be stuck somehow, running the same route over and over. I think about Holden sometimes when I'm doing my loops around Green Lake. I think about how he loved running so much that even death couldn't stop him from his morning routine. I think about how lonely it must have been, running that trail for 28 years, with nobody seeing you, nobody acknowledging you exist. I wonder if my interaction with him somehow gave him permission to finally stop, to finally rest. The article from 1997 said his body was found 3 days after he collapsed. He'd been lying there off the trail while other runners passed by, nobody noticing him, nobody stopping to help. Maybe that's why he was stuck. Maybe he needed someone to finally see him, to acknowledge what happened before he could move on. Do you believe some people can become so attached to their routines that they continue them even after death? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. My name is Paxton, and I'm 19 years old. I was working retail at a department store in Northgate Mall last year, saving money for community college. The mall itself was in this weird transitional phase, half dead but not quite gone. They were planning some big renovation that kept getting delayed, so meanwhile stores were closing left and right, leaving empty spaces with papered-over windows. Our store was one of the few still operating, holding on by a thread, and they had me working closing shifts 3 nights a week because I was young and didn't complain about the hours. Closing shift at a dying mall is depressing. By 8 p.m., the few customers still wandering around would leave, and by 9, when the mall officially closed, it was like a ghost town. Most of the other stores had already shut down for the night. The food court was dark. Even the security presence had been reduced to maybe 2 guards for the entire massive complex. My job was to clean up the department store, restock shelves, run the vacuum, count the register, all the standard closing procedures. Usually took me until about 10:30, and then I'd lock up and walk through the empty mall to the employee exit. The first time I heard the carousel music was on a Tuesday in late September. I was vacuuming the men's section around 9:45 when I heard it faintly over the sound of the vacuum. I turned the vacuum off to listen. Carousel music, that distinctive calliope sound, was playing somewhere in the mall. The notes were slightly warped and tinny, like it was coming through old speakers. I stood there listening, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The mall had a carousel on the first floor near the center court. It had been one of the main attractions back when the mall was thriving, a classic merry-go-round with painted horses and mirrored panels. But it had been shut down for at least 6 months, maybe longer. There was yellow caution tape around it, and a sign saying it was out of order. I'd walked past it dozens of times, and it was always dark and silent, the horses frozen mid-gallop. I finished vacuuming and did the rest of my closing tasks, but I kept hearing that music faintly in the background. By the time I locked up the store and headed toward the employee exit, it was after 10:30. The mall was dark except for the emergency lighting and a few overhead lights they left on for security. My footsteps echoed on the tile floor as I walked through the empty corridors. The music was getting louder as I got closer to the center court where the carousel was located. I should have just left. Should have gone straight to the employee exit and gotten out of there. But curiosity made me detour toward the center court. I wanted to see if the carousel was actually running, if maybe maintenance had turned it on for some reason. I came around the corner and stopped dead. The entire center court was lit up. Not just the emergency lighting, but all the regular mall lights, the decorative lighting around the fountain, everything. It was bright as midday, and in the middle of it all, the carousel was spinning. The horses were going up and down on their brass poles, the mirrored panels reflecting light in rotating patterns across the court. The music was coming from the carousel's speakers, that warped calliope melody playing the same loop over and over. The yellow caution tape was still there, hanging limp from the posts around the carousel, but the ride was definitely operating. I walked closer, my heart beating faster. The carousel was spinning at normal speed, the horses rising and falling in their mechanical rhythm, but there was nobody on it. No riders, no operator, no maintenance workers, just empty horses going round and round. I stood there watching it for maybe a minute, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The lights in the mall were turning on. one section at a time moving outward from the center court like a wave. I watched as the lights in the corridor leading toward the food court flickered on, then the next section, then the next. They were turning on in sequence, creating a path of light leading away from where I stood. I'm not proud of what happened next. I panicked. I turned and ran toward the employee exit, not caring about the noise I was making. My shoes slapped against the tile and my breathing sounded loud in my ears. Behind me, the carousel music continued playing, and I could hear the lights turning on in the sections I was running through, like something was following me, illuminating my path. I hit the employee exit door so hard I bruised my shoulder, burst out into the parking lot, and didn't stop running until I was in my car with the doors locked. I sat there, in the dark parking lot, hands shaking, trying to catch my breath. Through the mall's exterior windows, I could see the lights inside. They were all on now, every section, the entire mall lit up like it was the middle of a business day. But there was nobody in there except me, and I was out here. I started my car and drove home, my mind racing with explanations. Faulty wiring, automatic timers that were set wrong, some kind of maintenance test, anything rational that could explain what I'd just seen. I called in sick the next day. I couldn't face going back there, but I needed the job, and I couldn't afford to lose it. So 2 days later, I was back on the closing shift. Everything seemed normal that night. I did my usual routine, cleaned and restocked, counted the register. When I locked up around 10:30, the mall was dark and quiet like it should be. No carousel music, no lights turning on. I walked quickly to the employee exit and left without incident. But the following week, it happened again. Thursday night, around 9:50, I heard the carousel music start up. I was in the back stockroom organizing inventory and the sound came drifting through. The store. That same warped calliope melody. I ignored it, told myself I didn't care, finished my work as quickly as possible. When I left the store, I took a different route to the employee exit, one that didn't go anywhere near the center court. I didn't want to see that carousel spinning with nobody on it. The lights started turning on anyway. I was walking through a side corridor near what used to be a bookstore when the overhead lights flickered to life. Then the next section ahead of me lit up, then the next. I stopped walking and the lights stopped turning on. I took a few steps forward and another section lit up ahead of me. It was like the lights were responding to my movement, or anticipating it, showing me a path. That path led toward the carousel. Every time I tried to go a different direction, those corridors stayed dark. The only lit path was the one leading to the center court. I stood there facing this decision. I could run for the exit through the dark sections, or I could follow the lights. Something about running through the dark mall felt more terrifying than following where the lights wanted me to go. So I walked forward, following the illuminated path. The carousel was spinning again when I reached the center court, all lit up and playing its music. The horses went up and down, round and round, their painted faces frozen in mid-whinny. I walked up to the edge of the carousel, right up to the caution tape. That's when I saw someone was riding it. A figure was sitting on one of the horses on the far side, facing away from me. They were wearing dark clothes and sitting very still, not moving with the motion of the horse, just sitting there as the carousel turned. The carousel rotated and brought that horse around toward me. I could see the figure more clearly now. It was wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform, dark blue coveralls. As the horse came closer, I could see it was a man, older, maybe in his 50s. His head was bowed forward, like he was sleeping or unconscious. The carousel continued its rotation, bringing him directly in front of me. That's when I saw his face. His eyes were open but empty, staring at nothing. His skin had a gray pallor that looked wrong even in the artificial lighting. The carousel kept turning, carrying him away from me, around to the other side. I stood there frozen, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. The figure made another rotation, came back around to where I could see him clearly again. He looked dead. That's the only way I can describe it. He looked like a corpse sitting on that carousel horse, going round and round. I finally broke out of my paralysis and ran. I sprinted through the mall toward the employee exit, through dark corridors this time because I didn't care anymore about the lights or the path. I just needed out. I hit the exit door and burst into the parking lot, gasping for air. My car was parked under a light, and I ran to it, fumbling with my keys. Once, inside with the doors locked, I called 911. I told the dispatcher there was someone in the mall who looked like they needed medical attention, that I thought they might be dead. She asked me questions, and I tried to answer coherently, but I was rambling and panicked. She said she'd send police to check it out and told me to stay in my car. I sat there in the parking lot for about 20 minutes before 2 police cruisers showed up. The officers went into the mall through the main entrance. I waited. They came back out about 30 minutes later and walked over to my car. I rolled down the window, and one of them asked me to describe exactly what I'd seen and where. I told them about the center court, the carousel, the figure in the maintenance uniform. The officer looked at his partner, then back at me. He said they'd checked the entire center court area. The carousel was turned off and secured with caution tape. There was nobody on it or around it. All the mall lights were off except for emergency lighting. They asked if I'd been drinking or using any substances. I said no. The other officer asked if I was sure about the location. I insisted it was the center court carousel, that I'd seen it spinning with someone on it. They exchanged another look, and the first officer said they'd found something, but not at the carousel. He said in the back maintenance corridors, behind the scenes where mall employees and maintenance staff access the utilities, they'd found evidence someone had been living there. Blankets, empty food containers, personal items. But whoever it was had cleared out. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said about 3 months ago, a maintenance worker at the mall had gone missing. The man had been working a night shift doing repairs and never came home. His family reported him missing. There was an investigation, but he was never found. His truck was in the parking lot, but he'd vanished. The officer pulled up a photo on his phone and showed it to me. Asked if this was who I'd seen. It was him, the man on the carousel. Same face, same age, same maintenance uniform in the photo. The officer saw the recognition in my face and asked me to come down to the station to make a formal statement. I did. I told them everything I'd seen over the past few weeks. The carousel running when it shouldn't, the lights turning on, the figure I'd seen. They listened and took notes, but I could tell they didn't believe the supernatural parts. They thought maybe the missing maintenance worker had been living in the mall's back corridors, and I'd somehow glimpsed him before he fled. But that doesn't explain what I saw. That man on the carousel wasn't alive. I don't know how to describe the certainty of that. He wasn't sleeping or unconscious. He was beyond that. And the carousel was moving, spinning with power when it had been disconnected and out of order for months. I quit that job. Didn't even give 2 weeks' notice, just called and said I wasn't coming back. The mall finished its renovation eventually and reopened with new stores and a modern design. They removed the old carousel entirely, replaced it with a digital entertainment area. I've been back once since then, during the day, with friends, and it looks completely different. But I wonder sometimes if that maintenance worker ever made it out of there, or if some part of him is still in those back corridors, still trying to find his way home. If you worked alone in an empty building and saw something impossible, would you investigate or run? Tell me what you'd do. My name is Adley, and I'm 24 years old. I'm a grad student at the University of Washington, working on my master's in sociology. Like most grad students, I'm constantly broke and looking for affordable housing in a city where rent is absolutely insane. When I found a basement apartment in the University District for almost half the price of comparable places, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. It was on a side street just off the Ave, which is what everyone calls University Way, the main drag through the U District. The location was perfect, close to campus, walking distance to grocery stores and coffee shops. The apartment itself was small but functional, basically a studio with a separate bedroom, tiny kitchen, bathroom, with a shower stall. The landlord was this guy named Israel, who owned the house above. He lived on the main floor and rented out the basement as a separate unit. When I met him to see the place, he seemed normal enough, maybe a little nervous, but I figured that was just his personality. He explained that the apartment had its own entrance around the side of the house, so I'd have privacy and wouldn't need to go through his space. The rent was cheap because it was a basement with small windows and not much natural light, and because the previous tenant had left, suddenly breaking their lease. He seemed eager to rent it quickly. I moved in on a Saturday in January. Some friends helped me carry my stuff down the exterior stairs into the basement unit. It was darker than I remembered from the viewing, but I figured I'd get used to it. I set up my bed in the bedroom, arranged my desk and books in the main living area, stocked the kitchen with the basics. By evening, I was unpacked, and my friends had left. I was alone in my new place, tired but satisfied. I ordered pizza, watched something on my laptop, and went to bed early. The bedroom was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with one window up near the ceiling that looked out at ground level. You could see feet walking by on the sidewalk if anyone passed, but mostly you just saw the foundation of the house next door. I'd hung curtains for privacy even though nobody could really see in. The room had space for my bed, a small dresser, and not much else. There was a door in the wall opposite the bed, painted the same off-white as the walls. I'd noticed it during the viewing, but hadn't thought much about it. When I'd asked Israel about it, he'd said it was just old storage space that was sealed up. Nothing I needed to worry about. I slept fine that first night, exhausted from moving. But the second night, Monday, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound. Scratching. It was faint but distinct, coming from the wall with that painted door. I lay there listening, trying to figure out what it could be. My first thought was mice or rats, which would be disgusting but not uncommon in old houses. The scratching continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I waited but didn't hear it again, so I eventually fell back asleep. The scratching happened again, Tuesday night, same time, around 3 a.m. It was louder this time, more persistent. It sounded like something scraping against wood, a rhythmic back-and-forth motion. I got up and put my ear against the painted door, listening. The sound was definitely coming from the other side, from whatever space was behind that door. I knocked on the door and said hello, thinking maybe there was some kind of animal trapped in there. The scratching stopped immediately. Silence. I waited a few minutes but heard nothing else. The next morning, I texted Israel about it, asking if there might be animals getting into the walls. He replied quickly, saying he'd had the place inspected for pests recently, and everything was clear. But he'd send someone to check again if I was concerned. I said thanks, but didn't push it further. I didn't want to seem like a difficult tenant in my first week. The scratching became a nightly occurrence. Always around 3 a.m., always coming from behind that painted door. It would last anywhere from a few seconds to several minutes. The pattern started to seem deliberate, not random, like an animal would make. It was consistent, rhythmic, like someone dragging their nails across the wood in steady strokes. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake, waiting for it to start. By the end of the first week, I was exhausted and frustrated. I decided to examine the door more closely during daylight. I moved my dresser out of the way to get better access. The door was a standard size, maybe 30 inches wide, with a regular doorknob that had been painted over multiple times. The edges where the door met the frame were sealed with layers of paint, like someone had intentionally painted it shut. I tried turning the doorknob, but it wouldn't move, frozen in place by dried paint. I took some photos of the door and sent them to Israel, asking about the history of it. He called me instead of texting back, which immediately felt off. He said the door used to lead to a storage area, but they'd closed it off years ago because it wasn't up to code, something about moisture and mold issues. He said it was completely sealed, and there was nothing back there. His voice sounded strained, like he was choosing his words carefully. I asked him directly if I could open it to check for pests since the scratching was keeping me awake. There was a long pause before he said, that wouldn't be a good idea, that the space behind the door wasn't safe to enter. That conversation made everything worse. Now I wasn't just hearing scratching, I was living with this mystery door that my landlord didn't want me to open. I started researching the house online, looking for any public records or history. The property was old, built in the 1920s, and had gone through several owners over the decades. I couldn't find anything unusual in the records, no deaths or crimes, or anything that would explain why a door would be sealed shut. The scratching got worse. By the second week, it was happening for longer periods, sometimes 10 or 15 minutes straight. And it was getting louder, more aggressive. It sounded like whoever or whatever was on the other side was working at the wood, trying to wear it down. I started sleeping on the couch in the living area just to get away from the sound, but I could still hear it faintly through the bedroom door. Then I noticed the paint seal starting to crack. The edges of the door where it met the frame showed small gaps where the paint had been worked loose. Fresh wood was visible underneath, pale and clean compared to the yellowed paint around it. Whatever was scratching from the other side was making progress. The door was being opened from the inside. I took more photos and sent them to Israel with a message saying I needed him to come look at this immediately. He showed up that evening, clearly anxious. We stood in my bedroom looking at the door, and he went pale when he saw the gaps in the paint seal. I asked him again what was behind that door and why someone or something seemed to be trying to get out. He sat down on my bed and put his head in his hands. Then he told me something I wish I'd known before signing the lease. The previous tenant, the one who'd broken their lease suddenly, had called him in the middle of the night claiming someone was trapped behind that door. She said she could hear them scratching and calling for help. Israel had come over and checked, insisted there was nothing back there, that it was just old house noises or pipes or something explainable. But she'd refused to stay another night, moved out immediately, and never came back for her deposit or remaining belongings. He'd convinced himself she was unstable or on drugs, that she'd imagined the whole thing. I asked him why he didn't tell me this before I moved in. He said he needed to rent the place and honestly thought the previous tenant had just been paranoid. He said in all the years he'd owned the house, he'd never heard anything from that sealed room. I asked him what was actually back there, what the space was used for. He said when he bought the house 10 years ago, that door was already painted shut. The inspector had noted it in the report, but said the space wasn't accessible and appeared to be just a small closet or utility space that had been closed off for some reason. I told Israel I wanted out of my lease. He said he understood and would give me a full refund of my deposit and first month's rent if I left quietly without making a fuss. I should have taken that deal immediately, but I was angry and scared, and I wanted answers. I told him I was going to open that door, and he could either help me or get out of my way. He tried to argue, but I was determined. I went to the kitchen and got a utility knife, came back, and started cutting through the paint seal around the door edges. Israel stood there watching, telling me this was a bad idea, that we should just leave it alone. I ignored him. It took about 15 minutes to cut through all the layers of paint. The doorknob was still frozen, but now that the seal was broken, I could work on it. I used pliers to grip the knob and force it to turn. It finally gave way with a crack as old paint shattered. The door was unlocked. I pulled it open. The space beyond was dark and small, maybe 4 feet deep and 5 feet wide. Not even a closet, really, more like a storage nook. The walls were rough concrete, and there was a single shelf mounted on the back wall. The space was empty except for dust and cobwebs. I used my phone flashlight to examine it more carefully. The walls had marks on them, scratches in the concrete like something had been dragged across them repeatedly. The back of the door, the side that had been facing into this space, was covered in gouges, deep scratches in the wood, some of them going almost through the door panel. Israel was standing behind me, looking over my shoulder. He saw the scratches and made a small sound, almost like a whimper. I asked him how this was possible. How could there be scratches from the inside if the door had been sealed shut for years? He had no answer. We stood there, staring at the scratched wood, trying to make sense of it. Then we both noticed it at the same time. In the dust on that shelf, in the back of the space, there was a disturbance. Something had been there recently. The dust had finger marks in it, like someone had reached up and touched the shelf. But that was impossible. We'd just opened the door for the first time in who knows how many years. Nobody could have been in there. I moved closer with my phone light, and that's when I saw it. Tucked in the back corner of the shelf, almost hidden, was a small leather-bound book. I reached for it, and Israel grabbed my arm, told me not to touch it. But I pulled away from him and took the book down. It was old, the leather cracked and dry. I opened it to the first page. It was a journal, handwritten in faded ink. The first entry was dated March 1982. The entries described someone living in this basement apartment, a student at the university. The writing became increasingly paranoid and disjointed as the pages went on. The person wrote about hearing scratching sounds, about the painted door, about feeling trapped. The last entry, dated April 1982, said they were going to open the door, that they needed to know what was inside. The entry ended mid-sentence, the handwriting becoming a frantic scrawl that trailed off the page. I looked at Israel, and he looked back at me with an expression of pure horror. Neither of us spoke. I closed the book and backed out of the small space. The scratching started again right then, at that moment, loud and violent. But it wasn't coming from inside the space anymore. It was coming from behind us, from the bedroom door that led to the rest of the apartment. Like something had moved, had gotten out when we opened the sealed door. I dropped the journal and ran. I grabbed my laptop bag and phone and ran up the exterior stairs out of that basement. Israel was right behind me. We stood on the sidewalk in the dark, both of us breathing hard. I told him I wanted my stuff out of there, but I wasn't going back in alone. He said he'd call some people to help move my things the next day, that I could stay at a hotel and he'd pay for it. The next morning, Israel and 2 other guys went into the basement to get my belongings. They found everything exactly where I'd left it, except for one thing. The journal was gone, and the small space behind the painted door was empty, the scratches on the back of the door much deeper than they'd been the night before, like something had been working at the wood with renewed fury after we left. I never went back there. Israel had my stuff moved to a storage unit and refunded all my money like he promised. He told me later that he was going to seal that door again, but first he contacted the previous owners to ask about the space. They told him the door had been sealed when they bought the house in the 1980s, that they'd been told never to open it by the owner before them. Nobody seemed to know why. I found a different apartment in Capitol Hill, much more expensive but above ground with plenty of windows. I still think about that basement, though, and whatever was behind that door. I think about that journal, and who wrote it, and what happened to them. Mostly I think about those scratches, the ones that kept getting deeper, like something was trying very hard to get out, or maybe to let something in. Would you open a door your landlord specifically told you to avoid? Drop your answer below. My name is Judith, and I take the water taxi between West Seattle and downtown Seattle almost every single weekday. I'm 53 years old, work as a paralegal at a law firm downtown, and the water taxi is honestly one of the better parts of my commute. It takes about 15 minutes to cross Elliott Bay, and there's something peaceful about being on the water, watching the city skyline approach, seeing the ferries and cargo ships moving through the sound. It beats sitting in traffic on the bridge, that's for sure. I've been doing this commute for about 7 years now, and I know the routine like the back of my hand. The water taxi runs on a pretty consistent schedule during commute hours. Morning runs start around 6, and evening runs go until about 7. There are regular passengers, people like me who take it every day, and you start to recognize faces even if you never actually talk to most of them. There's the guy who always sits in the back reading paperback mysteries. The woman with the expensive running shoes who I assume jogs downtown during lunch. The college kids with their laptops and headphones. We're all part of this floating community of commuters, sharing the same space twice a day without really interacting. About 4 months ago, I started noticing someone new. A woman who looked to be maybe in her 30s, always sitting in the same spot on the port side of the boat, 3 rows from the front. She'd be there on the evening commute when I was heading home, around 6:15. She always wore business casual clothes, usually a dark blazer and slacks, and she carried a leather messenger bag. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a ponytail. What struck me most was how still she sat. Most passengers are on their phones, or reading, or looking out the windows, but she just sat there staring straight ahead with this blank expression on her face. I noticed her for a few weeks before it really started bothering me. She was there every single evening, same seat, same posture, same blank stare. She never got off at the West Seattle terminal when the rest of us did. I started paying closer attention, watching to see if she'd get off at any of the stops. The water taxi makes the standard route across the bay with no stops in between, so it's just downtown to West Seattle or vice versa. But this woman never stood up when we docked. She'd just sit there as everyone else filed off, and when I'd glance back from the dock, I could see her still sitting in that same position as the boat prepared for its next run. After about a month of seeing her every evening, I started to feel uneasy. There was something wrong about her presence, something I couldn't quite articulate. She never moved, never blinked that I could see, never shifted position. Her hands rested on her lap, and her eyes stared forward, and she could have been a mannequin, except she was clearly flesh and blood. I thought about saying something to her, asking if she was okay, but something always stopped me. An instinctive reluctance to engage with her, like some part of my brain was warning me to keep my distance. One evening in early October, I decided to sit closer to her. I wanted to observe her more carefully, see if there was some detail I was missing that would explain her strange behavior. I took a seat 2 rows behind her, on the opposite side of the aisle. From this angle, I could see her profile. Her skin was pale, almost grayish in the interior lighting of the boat. Her expression was completely neutral, no emotion visible. As the boat departed from downtown and started across the bay, I watched her carefully. She didn't move at all, not once. Not a shift in posture, not a turn of the head, nothing. About halfway across the bay, something happened that made my heart skip. She spoke. Her lips moved and words came out, but they weren't directed at anyone. She was staring straight ahead and speaking in a monotone voice, barely above a whisper. I strained to hear what she was saying over the engine noise and the conversations of other passengers. It took me a minute to make out the words, but when I did, I felt ice run through my veins. She was saying, "I couldn't swim to shore. I couldn't swim to shore." Over and over, the same phrase, in that flat, emotionless voice. I sat frozen in my seat, not sure what to do. Should I get the boat operator? Should I try to talk to her? Before I could decide, the boat was approaching the West Seattle terminal, and passengers were standing up to disembark. I stood with them, still watching her. She remained seated, still saying those words, though I could barely hear her now over the noise of people gathering their belongings and moving toward the exit. I got off the boat with everyone else and stood on the dock, watching through the windows as the boat prepared for its return trip. She was still there, sitting in her seat, lips moving. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard. I couldn't swim to shore. What did that mean? The more I thought about it, the more disturbed I became. I started researching ferry accidents and water taxi incidents in the Puget Sound area, looking for anything that might explain what I'd witnessed. I found several drownings over the years, people who'd fallen from boats or jumped from bridges, but nothing specific that connected to the water taxi route. The next evening, I took the water taxi home again, and she was there. Same seat, same posture, same blank expression. This time, I sat directly across the aisle from her, close enough that I could have reached out and touched her if I'd wanted to. As the boat crossed the bay, I watched her intently. Other passengers gave me odd looks, probably wondering why I was staring at this woman so intensely, but I didn't care. About halfway across, she started speaking again. The same phrase, repeated over and over. I couldn't swim to shore. I couldn't swim to shore. I gathered my courage and spoke. To her. I said, "Excuse me," asked if she was okay, if she needed help. She didn't respond, didn't turn her head, didn't acknowledge me at all, just kept staring forward and repeating those words. I reached out tentatively and touched her shoulder. The moment my hand made contact, she turned her head and looked directly at me. Her eyes were empty, like looking into dark pools of water, with nothing behind them. Her mouth stopped moving, and she stared at me in silence for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds. Then the lights on the boat flickered. When the lights came back on, maybe half a second later, she was facing forward again like nothing had happened. My hand was still extended where her shoulder had been, but now I was touching nothing but air. I pulled my hand back and looked around. The other passengers hadn't seemed to notice anything unusual. They were absorbed in their phones and conversations, oblivious. I sat back in my seat, my heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. When we docked at West Seattle, I got off quickly and went straight to the water taxi operator's booth. I asked the operator, a middle-aged guy named Caleb, who I'd seen working this route for years, if he knew anything about the woman who rides every evening but never gets off. He looked at me confused and asked what woman I was talking about. I described her, told him where she sits, explained that she's there every single evening. He shook his head and said he hadn't noticed anyone matching that description, and besides, everyone has to disembark at the end of the route. They do a check to make sure the boat is empty before heading back. I insisted she was there, that I'd seen her dozens of times. Caleb looked at me with concern and said, maybe I should get some rest, that the commute could be tiring, and sometimes people's minds play tricks on them. I started to argue, but stopped myself. I could tell he thought I was confused, or stressed, or possibly losing it. I thanked him and left, feeling frustrated and unsettled. Over the next few weeks, I continued to see her on every evening commute. Always the same seat, always the same behavior. I stopped trying to interact with her, and I didn't mention her to anyone else. I just observed from a distance, trying to understand what I was dealing with. One thing I noticed was that other passengers never sat in the seats immediately around her. Even when the boat was crowded and people were looking for places to sit, those particular seats stayed empty. It was like people instinctively avoided that area without consciously realizing they were doing it. I started asking around at work, casually mentioning the water taxi to see if anyone else who took it had noticed anything unusual. Most people I talked to drove or took the bus, but I found one coworker named Finley, who occasionally took the water taxi when his car was in the shop. I described the woman to him without mentioning the creepy details, just asking if he'd seen someone who matched her description. His reaction was immediate and visceral. He said yes, he'd seen her, and she'd given him such an unsettling feeling that he'd switched to taking the bus, even though it added 40 minutes to his commute. He said there was something very wrong about her, but he couldn't explain exactly what. That conversation confirmed I wasn't imagining things or having some kind of breakdown. Someone else had seen her and felt the same disturbing presence. I decided to do more research, this time focusing specifically on the water taxi and its history. I found articles about the service, which had been operating since 1997, and general information about Elliott Bay and the surrounding waters. Then I found something that made everything click into place. In the archives of the Seattle Times, I discovered an article from 3 years ago about a woman who'd gone missing after boarding the water taxi downtown. She'd been seen getting on the evening commute by several witnesses, but she never arrived at the West Seattle terminal. Her family reported her missing when she didn't come home. There was a search of the bay, but her body wasn't recovered for 3 weeks. When they finally found her, she'd washed up near Alki Beach. The cause of death was drowning. The article mentioned that witnesses said she'd seemed disoriented and upset when boarding the ferry, and there was speculation about whether she'd jumped or fallen from the boat during the crossing. The article included a photo of the missing woman. My hands started shaking when I saw it. It was her. The woman I'd been seeing on the water taxi every evening for the past 4 months. Same face, same dark hair, same general build. The article listed her age as 34 and her name, but I won't repeat it here. It feels disrespectful somehow, using her real name when talking about what she's become. I printed the article and kept it in my bag. The next evening on the water taxi, I sat in my usual spot and waited. When she appeared, sitting in her customary seat, I took out the article and read it again while watching her. The timing was right. The article said she'd gone missing on a Tuesday evening in June, 3 years ago. The water taxi route she'd taken was the same one I took every day, the 6:15 from downtown to West Seattle, and her body had been found in the bay, meaning she'd drowned in these same waters the boat was crossing right now. Halfway across the bay, she started speaking again. I couldn't swim to shore. I understood now. She'd gone into the water somewhere along this route, maybe jumped or fallen or been pushed, and she'd tried to swim to shore. But Elliott Bay is cold, and the current is strong, and the distance to shore from the middle of the crossing is significant. She hadn't made it. She'd drowned out there in the dark water, and now some part of her was trapped on this boat, repeating the same journey over and over, reliving those final moments. I thought about trying to help her somehow, though I had no idea how you'd help a ghost or spirit or whatever she was. I considered talking to her again, trying to tell her that she didn't have to keep riding this boat, that she could move on. But I remembered the empty look in her eyes when she'd turned to face me that one time, and I decided against it. Whatever she was now, she wasn't the person she'd been in life. She was something else, something caught between states, and I didn't think my words would reach her. I kept taking the water taxi because I didn't have a better commuting option, but I started sitting as far from her as possible. I'd board the boat and immediately look to see if she was there, which she always was, and then I'd find a seat at the opposite end. Other passengers continued to avoid that section without seeming to realize they were doing it. Caleb and the other operators never acknowledged her presence, never did anything to suggest they saw her sitting there day after day. About a month ago, something changed. I got on the evening boat and took my usual seat near the back. I glanced toward her spot, and it was empty. For the first time in months, she wasn't there. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The boat crossed the bay without incident, and when I got off at West Seattle, I found myself looking back at that empty seat, wondering if she'd finally found peace, or if she'd just moved on to haunt some other location. She hasn't been back since. I still take the water taxi every day, and I still look for her out of habit, but that seat stays empty now. Sometimes I wonder what changed. Maybe enough time finally passed. Maybe someone did something to help her that I don't know about. Or maybe she's still out there somewhere in the bay, still trying to swim to shore, still caught in that final desperate moment of her life. I hope not. I hope she found her way to wherever she was supposed to go, but I'll never know for sure. The thing that haunts me most is thinking about how many times I passed her before I really noticed her, how many other commuters saw her and felt that instinctive unease but dismissed it and forgot about it by the time they got home. How many ghosts do we pass by every day without really seeing them? How many lost souls are trapped in the places where they died, invisible to most people, endlessly repeating the same actions? It's a disturbing thought, and one I can't shake even now. If you saw the same person in the same spot every day on your commute, but they never seemed to actually go anywhere, what would you do? Would you investigate or try to ignore it? Let me know in the comments. My name is Cinnamon, and I'm 23 years old. I know my name is unusual. My mom was really into unique names, and I've learned to own it over the years. I moved to Seattle about 2 years ago for a job in social media marketing, and I've always been someone who's drawn to weird experiences and urban legends. My friends call me adventurous, but honestly, I think I just get bored easily and like chasing thrills. That personality trait is what led me to the Fremont Troll on a dare that I deeply regret. If you're not familiar with Seattle, the Fremont Troll is this massive concrete sculpture under the north end of the Aurora Bridge. It's been there since 1990. This 18-foot-tall troll clutching an actual Volkswagen Beetle in one hand, emerging from under the bridge like it's climbing out of the earth. It's become a pretty famous Seattle landmark, one of those quirky things the city is known for. During the day, it's a tourist attraction with people constantly taking photos and climbing on it. But at night, especially late at night, the area under that bridge gets dark and isolated and honestly pretty creepy. I run a social media account where I post content about Seattle's weird side, hidden spots, local legends, that kind of thing. I've built up a decent following, about 50,000 people, and I'm always looking for content that will get engagement. One of my followers sent me a message in late September, challenging me to go to the Fremont Troll at midnight alone and film content there. They said most people only see it during the day, and it would be interesting to show what the space feels like in the middle of the night. They offered to donate $100 to my account if I did it, which honestly was pretty good motivation since I was barely making rent. I decided to do it on a Friday night. I told my roommate Kalani where I was going and when I'd be back, just in case something happened. She thought I was being dramatic, but agreed to check on me if I wasn't home by 1 a.m. I drove to Fremont around 11:30, parked on a side street, and walked toward the bridge. The neighborhood was quiet, most businesses closed, not many people around. As I got closer to the troll, the streetlights seemed dimmer, and the shadows got longer. The Aurora Bridge loomed overhead, cars occasionally whooshing past on the roadway above. The troll sculpture was lit by a couple of spotlights mounted nearby, but the light was dramatic and created harsh shadows that made the whole scene look more menacing than whimsical. I stood there for a minute, just looking at it. During the day, the troll seems almost friendly in a grotesque way, but at night, it felt different. More aggressive, more real somehow. Its one eye, made from a hubcap, gleamed in the spotlight. Its concrete fingers gripped that Volkswagen Beetle like it had just plucked it from the street. The mouth was open in what could be interpreted as a smile or a snarl depending on your perspective. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I did my usual introduction, talking to the camera about where I was and what the challenge entailed. I walked around the sculpture, filming from different angles, talking about the history of the piece and how it was created by a team of artists. The whole time I was recording, I had this feeling of being watched, but I attributed it to the troll's eye seeming to follow you no matter where you stood. It's designed that way, an optical illusion that makes it feel alive. I climbed up onto the sculpture to get some shots from different perspectives. People do this all the time during the day, so it's not disrespectful or anything. It's pretty much expected. I sat on the troll's shoulder and filmed the view from up there, the bridge overhead, the dark space underneath where the concrete meets the hillside. That's when I heard my name. Clear as day, someone said, "Cinnamon," from somewhere under the bridge where the troll appears to be emerging from the earth. I stopped filming and looked around. There was nobody visible. The area was empty except for me and the sculpture. I called out asking if someone was there, thinking maybe another person had shown up and recognized me from my social media. No response, just the sound of traffic on the bridge above and the distant noise of the city. I convinced myself I'd imagined it and went back to filming. I was doing a piece to camera, talking about how the space felt different at night, when I heard it again. My name, called from the darkness under the bridge, but closer this time. I jumped down from the sculpture and backed away, my phone still recording. My heart was beating fast and I was scanning the shadows, trying to see who was messing with me. That's when I saw movement. Something was coming out from behind the troll, from the space where its body connects to the hillside. At first, I thought it was a person, just someone who'd been hiding back there to scare me. But the way it moved was wrong. It wasn't walking. It was kind of crawling or climbing, moving in a way that didn't look human. I should have run right then. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there. But I'm an idiot, and I kept filming because I was thinking about the content, about how great this footage would be for my account. I zoomed in with my phone camera, trying to capture whatever was emerging from behind the troll. Through my phone screen, I could see it more clearly. It was humanoid, but the proportions were off. The limbs were too long, the joints bent at angles that weren't quite right. And it was moving toward me. That's when I ran. I sprinted back toward where I'd parked, my phone clutched in my hand, no longer caring about filming or content, or anything except getting away from whatever that thing was. I could hear something behind me, not footsteps exactly, but a scraping sound like something being dragged across concrete. I didn't look back, just ran as fast as I could down the street toward my car. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, got inside and locked the doors. I sat there gasping for breath, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I looked back toward the bridge and saw nothing. The street was empty. The troll sculpture sitting there, exactly as it had been, illuminated by those spotlights. Whatever I'd seen was gone, or maybe had never left the shadows under the bridge. I drove home way too fast, ran up to my apartment, and locked myself inside. Kalani was still awake watching TV, and she immediately asked what was wrong, because apparently I looked terrified. I tried to explain what had happened, but it sounded insane even to me. I told her I'd seen something under the bridge, something that had come out from behind the troll and chased me. She asked if it was a person, maybe a homeless individual I'd startled. I said no, it definitely wasn't a person. It moved wrong and looked wrong. She suggested maybe it was a dog or some kind of animal. That in the dark and the adrenaline, I'd misidentified what I was seeing. That explanation made sense, and I wanted to believe it, but I knew what I'd seen. Whatever came out from behind that sculpture wasn't an animal. At least, not any kind of animal that should exist. I looked at the footage on my phone. I had about 15 minutes of video from my time at the Troll. Most of it was just me doing my usual content creator thing, talking to the camera and filming the sculpture. But there was a section where the video got weird. Right around the time I heard my name the second time, the image on my phone started to distort. The footage became grainy and pixelated. Colors shifted to strange hues. And there was this interference pattern, like old VHS static. The audio was distorted too, my voice sounding warped and stretched. I watched that distorted section frame by frame. At one point, just before I jumped down from the sculpture and started backing away, there's a single frame where something is visible. It's partially obscured by the digital distortion, but you can make out a shape behind the troll. It's tall, taller than a person should be, with elongated limbs and a head that's tilted at an unnatural angle. The image quality is so degraded that you can't make out details, but the shape is definitely there. One frame, less than a second, and then it's gone, and the video returns to normal. I posted the video to my account the next day. I edited it down to the most interesting parts and included that distorted section with the strange shape visible for that one frame. I wrote a caption about the dare, about what I'd experienced, and asked my followers what they thought I'd captured. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The video got hundreds of thousands of views in the first few hours. People were analyzing that single frame, enhancing it, trying to figure out what the shape was. Most of the comments were skeptical. People said I'd faked it, that I'd added the distortion and the shape in post-production for views. Others said it was pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist, that the shape was just random digital noise. A few people said they believed me, that they'd had similar experiences at the Troll or other locations around Seattle. And then there were the comments that really disturbed me. Several people, maybe a dozen, left comments saying I shouldn't have gone there alone at midnight. They said the troll sculpture wasn't just art. that it was built on a site that had significance, that the artists had chosen that location specifically because of what was already there. They warned me not to go back, said that I'd gotten the attention of something that I didn't want to be noticed by. Most of these comments were vague and cryptic, but one person left a longer message that I screenshot and saved. They said the space under the Aurora Bridge had been considered cursed or haunted long before the troll sculpture was installed. There were stories going back decades about people seeing things under that bridge, hearing voices, experiencing time distortions. The commenter claimed that homeless individuals refused to camp in that specific area even though it would provide good shelter, because they knew something was wrong with that spot. They said the troll sculpture was created partly to reclaim the space, to make it friendly and artistic instead of dark and forbidding. But whatever was there before the sculpture didn't go away. It just adapted, using the troll as camouflage or as a focal point. I didn't know whether to believe any of this. It could all be urban legend and internet nonsense, people building mythology around a piece of public art. But I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd experienced, the feeling of being watched, hearing my name called from the darkness, seeing that shape emerge from behind the concrete. And I couldn't explain the distortion in my video or that single frame showing something that shouldn't be there. About a week after I posted the video, I started having dreams about the troll. Not nightmares exactly, but unsettling dreams where I'd be back under the bridge and the sculpture would be moving. Its concrete head would turn to look at me. Its hand would release the Volkswagen and reach toward me. In the dreams, I couldn't move, couldn't run, just had to stand there while it slowly reached for me with those massive concrete fingers. I'd wake up gasping, my heart racing, convinced for a few seconds that I was still there. The dreams happened every night for about 2 weeks. Kalani said I was talking in my sleep, saying things she couldn't quite make out, but that sounded distressed. She suggested I see a therapist, that maybe the experience had traumatized me more than I wanted to admit. I considered it, but kept putting it off, telling myself the dreams would fade with time. Then something happened that made everything worse. About 3 weeks after my midnight visit to the troll, I was scrolling through my phone late at night and decided to look at the photos in my camera roll. I have thousands of photos, mostly content for my social media and random shots of my life. I was looking through photos from around the time of the troll visit when I found something that stopped my heart. There were photos on my phone that I hadn't taken. 3 images, time-stamped from the night I went to the troll, but from times when I was already home and asleep. The first photo was taken at 2:37 a.m., hours after I'd left the bridge. It showed the troll sculpture from ground level, but the perspective was strange, like the camera was very low to the ground or being held at an odd angle. The second photo was taken at 3:15 a.m. and showed the street leading away from the troll, the same route I'd run when I fled. The third photo was from 4:02 a.m., and it showed the exterior of my apartment building. I showed the photos to Kalani, and her face went pale. She asked if I was sure I hadn't taken them, maybe while half asleep or something. I was absolutely certain. I'd been dead asleep by 2 a.m. that night, exhausted and freaked out from the experience. There was no way I'd gotten up, driven back to Fremont, taken photos, and returned home without any memory of it. And besides, my car keys had been on the counter all night where I'd left them. We looked at the photos more closely, zooming in and examining every detail. That's when we noticed something in the third photo, the one showing my apartment building. There was a window visible, lit from within. It was my bedroom window, and in that window, you could just barely make out a silhouette. Someone or something was in my room when that photo was taken. I checked the metadata on the photo. 4:02 a.m., taken with my phone, geotagged to the location of my apartment building. I filed a police report about the photos, but there wasn't much they could do. There was no evidence of a break-in, nothing stolen, no sign anyone had been in the apartment. The officer who took my report suggested maybe I had sleepwalked and taken the photos myself, Or maybe someone had access to my phone and had taken them as a prank. Neither explanation felt right, but I didn't have anything better to offer. I stopped posting content about urban legends and creepy locations after that. Deleted the troll video from my account despite how many views it had gotten. I couldn't deal with the constant reminders, the comments from people claiming they'd had similar experiences or warning me about going back. I shifted my content to safer topics, food recommendations, and local events, boring stuff that wouldn't attract whatever attention I'd gotten that night under the bridge. It's been almost 4 months now since my midnight visit to the Fremont Troll. The dreams have mostly stopped, though I still have them occasionally. I haven't found any more. Mysterious photos on my phone. Life has gone back to something resembling normal, but I still think about it constantly. I think about that shape I saw emerging from behind the troll, the way it moved that wasn't quite human. I think about my name being called from the darkness, spoken by a voice I didn't recognize. I think about those photos that appeared on my phone, showing a progression from the troll to my building to inside my room. The worst part is not knowing what I encountered that night. Was it something that lives under that bridge? Some entity that's been there longer than the sculpture? Was it connected to the troll itself somehow, drawn to the location by the art, or maybe trapped there? Or was it something else entirely, something that followed me home and has been watching me ever since? I don't have answers, and I'm not sure I want them. Some things are better left unknown. I drive past the Fremont Troll sometimes. Can't really avoid it if you're going anywhere north of the ship canal. I always look over when I pass, just a quick glance to see if anything looks different. It never does. The sculpture sits there exactly as it always has, tourists climbing on it during the day, cars passing overhead on the bridge. But I wonder sometimes if something else is there too, hiding in the shadows behind the concrete, waiting for the next person curious enough or stupid enough to visit after dark. Have you ever filmed something for social media that you wish you hadn't? What would you do if you found photos on your phone that you definitely didn't take? Share your thoughts below. My name is Saint, and I'm in my late 30s. I've always been fascinated by history, especially industrial history and the development of cities. I'm the kind of person who reads historical plaques, visits museums on weekends, and gets genuinely excited about old buildings and machinery. Seattle has a lot of interesting historical sites if you know where to look, and one of my favorites is the Georgetown Steam Plant. It's this beautiful red brick building from 1906 that used to provide power for Seattle's streetcar system. The machinery inside is still intact, these massive steam engines and boilers that are impressive even when they're not running. The building operates as a museum now, and they give tours on weekends. I'd been on the public tour once before, about a year ago, and loved it. The guides are passionate about the history and the engineering, and they let you get pretty close to the equipment. When I saw they were offering a special extended tour one Saturday in November, I signed up immediately. The extended tour was supposed to go into more detail about the technical aspects and show some areas that aren't part of the regular tour. There were only about 12 people signed up, which was perfect, because it meant we'd get a more intimate experience and could ask more questions. The tour started at 4 p.m., which meant we'd be there as it was getting dark outside. The Georgetown Steam Plant is in an industrial part of Seattle south of downtown, surrounded by warehouses and manufacturing facilities. It's not a neighborhood you'd visit unless you had a specific reason to be there. I arrived about 15 minutes early and waited in the small visitor area near the entrance. The other tour participants trickled in, a mix of ages and backgrounds, but all clearly interested in industrial history based on the conversations happening around me. Our guide was a volunteer named Piper, probably in her 60s, who'd been giving tours at the steam plant for over a decade. She had that enthusiastic energy that good tour guides have, genuinely excited to share information about something she loved. We started in the main boiler room, this cavernous space with enormous boilers rising up 3 stories. Piper explained how the plant worked, how coal was shoveled into the fireboxes to heat water and create steam, how that steam powered the engines that generated electricity. Even cold and inactive, the equipment was imposing and beautiful in its industrial way. We moved through different areas of the plant, seeing the pumps and condensers and control mechanisms. Everything was original and well preserved, like stepping back in time to the early 20th century. Piper pointed out details in the engineering, clever solutions to problems that modern engineers might solve differently, but that worked perfectly well with the technology available at the time. I was taking notes and photos, completely absorbed in the information. About an hour into the tour, we went up to the third floor to see the overhead cranes and get a bird's-eye view of the boiler room. The third floor was darker than the lower levels, lit mostly by the late afternoon light coming through the high windows. We were standing on a metal catwalk looking down at the massive boilers below when I heard something that didn't fit. It was a mechanical sound, metal on metal, rhythmic and deliberate. It sounded like the plant was operating, like the machinery was running, even though I knew it hadn't been active in decades. I looked at Piper to see if she'd heard it too. She was mid-sentence explaining something about the crane system and didn't seem to notice. None of the other tour participants were reacting either. I listened carefully, and the sound continued, a kind of hissing and clanking that reminded me of descriptions I'd read about how the plant sounded when it was operational. Steam moving through pipes, machinery turning, metal expanding and contracting from heat. But the boilers were cold and had been for years. There was no steam, no heat, no reason for those sounds. We moved to a different section of the third floor, and the sounds followed. Now they were louder, more distinct. I could hear what sounded like footsteps on metal grating, the kind of sound workers' boots would make walking on the catwalks. I stopped and turned around, looking back the way we'd come. The catwalk behind us was empty, but I could swear I saw movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that didn't quite match the stationary equipment. Piper was leading the group down a narrow passage to show us some specialized equipment when I decided to hang back slightly. I wanted to observe whatever was happening without the distraction of the tour guide's narration. The group moved ahead, and I stayed on the catwalk, looking down at the boiler room. That's when I saw them. Shadows of people moving between the boilers on the ground floor. Not actual people, just their shadows cast on the walls by a light source I couldn't identify. There were multiple shadows, moving with purpose like workers going about their tasks. I felt my skin crawl. There was nobody down there. The ground floor was empty. We'd just come from there 15 minutes ago. But these shadows were clearly defined, human-shaped, moving in patterns that suggested intentional activity. One shadow appeared to be shoveling something, the motion repetitive and steady. Another seemed to be walking with a tool or piece of equipment. I watched for maybe 30 seconds before the shadows faded, not suddenly, but gradually, like the light source was dimming. I caught up with the tour group quickly, not wanting to be alone in that space anymore. Piper was showing everyone a control panel with original gauges and switches. I tried to focus on what she was saying, but I kept glancing around, looking for more signs of the impossible activity I'd witnessed. The mechanical sounds had stopped, or maybe I just couldn't hear them over Piper's explanation and the questions from other tour participants. We descended back to the second floor and entered what Piper called the engine room. This was where the actual steam engines were located, huge machines with pistons and flywheels and connecting rods. The engines were painted in their original colors, greens and reds and blacks, and they dominated the space. Piper explained how each engine worked, how the steam pressure drove the pistons that turned the flywheels that generated electricity. She pointed out specific components and talked about the engineering innovations that made these machines efficient for their time. I was standing near the largest engine, one called the vertical cross-compound engine, when I noticed something odd. The engine was giving off heat. Not a lot, but enough that I could feel it when I stood close. I moved my hand near one of the massive metal cylinders and felt definite warmth radiating from it. That didn't make sense. The plant had been inactive since the 1970s. There was no reason for any of the equipment to be warm. I asked Piper about it, trying to sound casual. I said I thought I felt heat coming from the engine, and was that normal? She looked surprised and came over to check. She put her hand near where I'd felt the warmth and frowned. She said there shouldn't be any heat. The building wasn't even heated in this section, but sometimes metal could retain warmth from earlier in the day if sunlight had been hitting it through the windows. Her explanation made sense logically, but I'd felt what I'd felt. That engine was warm, warmer than ambient temperature could explain. As the tour continued, I became increasingly aware that something was off about the space we were in. The other participants didn't seem to notice anything unusual, but I kept experiencing things that shouldn't be possible. I'd hear voices in distant parts of the building, men's voices calling to each other in words I couldn't quite make out. I'd see movement in areas we'd already passed through, shadows and shapes that disappeared when I looked directly at them. And there was a smell that came and went, coal smoke and hot metal and machine oil, the smell of an industrial plant in operation. We moved to an area on the right side of the building, the third floor again, where there was a large open space with original wooden floorboards and exposed brick walls. Piper explained this had been a storage area and office space for the plant supervisors. The afternoon light was fading now, and the space was dim, lit only by a few overhead bulbs that cast harsh shadows. That's when I had the most intense experience of the entire tour. I was standing near a window, looking out at the industrial landscape of Georgetown, when I became aware of a presence behind me. Not just a vague feeling, but a distinct sense that someone was standing there. I turned around, and for just a moment, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, I saw him. A man in work clothes from the early 20th century, canvas pants and a heavy shirt, his face dirty with coal dust. He was looking at me with an expression of confusion, like he was trying to figure out who I was and what I was doing in his workspace. Then he was gone, not fading away or disappearing gradually, just suddenly not there. I was staring at an empty space where a man had been standing a second before. My heart was pounding, and I felt lightheaded. I looked around to see if anyone else had seen him, but the rest of the tour group was on the other side of the room, listening to Piper explain something about the administrative operations of the plant. I walked over to where the man had been standing. The floorboards there looked the same as everywhere else, old and worn, but solid. I knelt down and examined the floor more closely, not sure what I was looking for. That's when I noticed something. There were scorch marks on the floor in that area, dark stains that could have been from fire or extreme heat. They were old, probably decades old, but clearly visible once you knew to look for them. After the tour group moved on, I stayed in that spot for another minute. I pulled out my phone and searched for information about accidents or deaths at the Georgetown steam plant. I found a historical record mentioning a fatal accident in 1951. A worker had been killed when a steam line ruptured on the third floor right side of the building. The description matched the area where I was standing. The worker's name was listed, but I won't repeat it here. The record said the accident happened suddenly. Steam at extreme temperature and pressure escaping and causing fatal burns before anyone could respond. I caught up with the tour group, feeling shaken. Piper was explaining how the plant had been decommissioned in 1972 and how preservationists had fought to save it from demolition. The tour was winding down. We'd seen everything there was to see. As we headed back toward the entrance, Piper asked if anyone had questions. I almost asked her about the accident in 1951, about whether other people had reported unusual experiences in the building, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to be that person, the one claiming to see ghosts on a historical tour. We reached the visitor area, and Piper thanked everyone for coming. As people were gathering their belongings and preparing to leave, I approached her privately. I told her I'd felt like the building had a lot of energy. Asked if other visitors ever reported unusual sensations or experiences. Her expression changed immediately, becoming more guarded. She said that yes, some visitors reported feeling presences or hearing things, especially in the area where the 1951 accident occurred. She said the volunteers who worked there regularly all had stories, things they'd seen or heard when they were in the building alone or closing up at night. She told me that she personally believed the building retained echoes of the people who'd worked there, especially those who died there. She said it wasn't threatening or malevolent, just residual energy from decades of human activity and strong emotions. The plant had been a vital part of Seattle's infrastructure for 70 years, employing dozens of men who spent their working lives maintaining it. Some of those men had been injured or killed in industrial accidents. It made sense, she said, that something of them would remain. I asked her specifically about the third floor right side where I'd seen the worker's shadow. She nodded and said that was the most active area, the place where the most incidents were reported. She said workers' shadows were commonly seen there, moving along the walls despite no corresponding physical presence. Sometimes people heard their names called when they were alone in that section. The smell of coal smoke and hot machinery would appear suddenly and then dissipate. She'd experienced it herself multiple times over her years of giving tours. Hearing her confirm what I'd experienced was both validating and disturbing. I'd hoped she would tell me I'd imagined everything, that the building was just a building, and nothing paranormal happened there. Instead, she was essentially confirming that the Georgetown steam plant was legitimately haunted by the workers who'd spent their lives there, particularly the man who died in that steam line accident in 1951. I left the steam plant as the sun was setting, the red brick building glowing in the last light of day. I sat in my car for a while before driving home, processing what I'd experienced. I've been back to the steam plant once since then for a regular daytime tour. I didn't see or hear anything unusual that time. Everything was normal and educational and interesting in the way historical sites usually are. But I know what I experienced during that evening tour. I saw shadows of workers who've been gone for decades. I felt the heat from engines that haven't run in 50 years. I saw a man who died in 1951, standing in the exact spot where the accident killed him. I've read more about the concept of residual haunting since then, the idea that traumatic or repetitive events can leave an imprint on a location that replays under certain conditions. The Georgetown steam plant seems to be a perfect example of that phenomenon. Decades of daily work, the same tasks performed over and over by the same men, the intense emotions of dangerous industrial labor, and at least one tragic death all combined to leave something behind in that building. I still visit historical sites regularly, and I still love learning about industrial history. But now I approach these places with a different awareness. These aren't just empty buildings with interesting machinery. They're places where people lived significant portions of their lives, where some people died, where emotions and experiences were intense enough to leave traces that persist long after the people themselves are gone. The Georgetown steam plant taught me that history isn't just facts and dates and objects. Sometimes it's presences and shadows, and the echoes of workers who never really left their posts. If you've ever been somewhere and felt like you were experiencing a moment from the past, share your story in the comments. I'd love to know I'm not the only one who's encountered these echoes of history. That was the final story from our journey through Seattle's darkest encounters. If these true stories kept you up at night, make sure you're subscribed to Bleak Fears, because we're just getting started. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which story disturbed you the most, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into real horror. Remember, the most terrifying stories are the ones that actually happened. Until next time, stay safe out there.